She came to sign divorce papers. She left with bruises on her wrist and a stranger's voice still ringing in her ears. Claire Whitaker had survived 3 years of marriage to a man who smiled at charity galas and broke things behind closed doors. She thought she knew what danger looked like. She thought she could handle one last meeting, one last signature, one final ending. She was wrong about all of it. Because the man who saved her that rainy Tuesday morning in a Manhattan cafe wasn't a hero. He was something far more terrifying than the husband she was trying to escape. And somehow, God help her, that made her feel safe for the first time in years. If this story already has you gripping your seat, hit that like button right now and drop your city in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now, let's get into it. The rain had been falling since before Claire woke up. The kind of heavy, relentless New York rain that turns taxi windows into smeared watercolors and makes every street corner feel like the edge of something unfinished. She sat at a small table near the back of Fortuna Cafe on West 54th Street with her hands wrapped around a ceramic mug she hadn't touched in 20 minutes, watching the door like she was waiting for a verdict instead of a man. She was, in some ways. The divorce agreement sat in a manila folder beside her elbow, 12 pages. Her attorney had walked her through every paragraph twice, flagged the places where Damien had tried to be clever, made sure Claire understood what she was agreeing to and what she was walking away from. 3 years of marriage reduced to clauses and signatures and the quiet bureaucratic surrender of a shared life. The attorney called it a clean exit. Claire thought that was an extraordinary lie. There was nothing clean about any of this. She had chosen the cafe deliberately, public enough that Damien would behave, crowded enough that she wouldn't feel trapped, familiar enough that the barista behind the counter knew her by order and would notice if anything felt wrong. She had stopped thinking of that kind of calculation as paranoia approximately 18 months ago, when Damien put his hand through a wall 6 inches from her face because she had served dinner 20 minutes late. After that, safety planning stopped feeling neurotic. It started feeling like survival arithmetic. The bell above the cafe door chimed at 11:04 a.m., and Damien Vale walked in. He was objectively handsome, which was something Claire had never stopped resenting. Tall, with dark hair going silver at the temples, wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than most people's car payments. He had the kind of face that photographed beautifully, sculpted, symmetrical, constructed for trust. Claire had watched him work that face at fundraisers and investor dinners for 3 years. She knew exactly how hollow it was. He saw her immediately. His eyes moved across the cafe in the practiced way of a man accustomed to scanning rooms for advantage. And when they landed on her, his expression shifted into something that looked almost like warmth. That was the thing about Damien that had taken her longest to understand. The warmth was real. It was just conditional. It existed only as long as she was exactly what he needed her to be. He pulled out the chair across from her without being invited, and sat down with the unhurried ease of a man who had never once in his adult life felt unwelcome anywhere. "You look tired," he said. "I'm fine." She pushed the folder toward him. "Your attorney has already reviewed everything. The terms are what we agreed on." He didn't touch the folder. He picked up her untouched coffee instead, looked at it, set it back down. A small, deliberate demonstration. "I can touch your things without asking, and there is nothing you will do about it." She recognized the behavior. She had a catalog of it. "I thought we could talk first," he said. "There's nothing to talk about. We talk through our attorneys now. Claire." He said her name the way he always had, with that particular softness that had once made her feel chosen and now made her stomach clench. "We were married for 3 years. We shared a home. I think we can manage one conversation without treating each other like strangers." "I'd prefer strangers," she said. "Strangers don't have a history." Something moved behind his eyes. It was brief, barely visible. A flicker of the thing underneath the charming surface. The actual Damien Vale, who lived beneath the suits and the sculpted jawline and the careful social performance. She had learned to watch for it the way you watch for weather changes in the mountains. Fast pressure drops. Certain kinds of quiet. "You've been spending time with your friend Marta," he said pleasantly, "on the Upper West Side. That little apartment building on 86th, 3rd floor. Claire went very still. "I'm just saying, Damien continued, his voice staying warm, staying conversational, that I hope you're being careful. The city can be dangerous for women who don't have adequate support structures. There it was, wrapped in courtesy, delivered with a smile, but unmistakably what it was, a threat. The most Damien kind of threat, one that allowed him to claim innocence if challenged while landing with perfect calculated precision. Claire made herself hold his gaze. She had spent 3 years learning how not to flinch visibly, how to keep her breathing even, how to offer him nothing that looked like fear, because fear fed something in him that she had never wanted to feed. Sign the papers, Damien. In time, he leaned back in his chair. I've been thinking about the asset division. I feel like my attorney may have been too generous with the settlement terms. Those terms have been agreed to. They're final. Nothing is final until signatures are on paper. His jaw moved fractionally. And I've been doing some research on your little restoration projects. The Callaway contract. The Mercier apartment. I wonder what those clients would think if they heard some things about your professional conduct. Your personal conduct. The cafe noise continued around them. Espresso machines hissing, conversations overlapping, someone near the window laughing at something on their phone. The ordinary human texture of a Tuesday morning in Manhattan, completely indifferent to the small, precise violence happening at the corner table. You don't have anything, Claire said. Her voice stayed level. She was proud of that. I have photographs, he said simply. I have a very motivated private investigator, a great deal of patience, and the phone number of Marcus Calloway's very traditional, very easily scandalized wife. He smiled. I'm not trying to be unpleasant, Claire. I'm just suggesting that we revisit the settlement terms before either of us does something we regret. Her hands, under the table, had gone cold. Her heart was hitting the inside of her chest with the kind of rhythm that meant her body understood the danger even when her brain was still trying to stay rational. She had prepared for this. Her attorney had warned her it might happen, told her to stay calm, told her to say nothing and let the legal process handle it. She had rehearsed exactly what she would do if he tried to renegotiate through intimidation. What she had not prepared for was the Italian. Damien leaned forward, dropping his voice, and switched languages mid-sentence without warning. It happened fast. A single fluid shift from English into rapid, low Italian, the words coming in a tight, quiet torrent directly at her. She understood fragments. Her Italian was conversational at best, learned during a study abroad semester a decade ago, and whatever he was saying was moving too fast and too quietly for her to catch completely. But she caught enough. Car. Brake lines. Marta. A phrase that sounded like it described something happening to a person. Not quickly. Claire felt the color leave her face. She understood now that the conversation was not about renegotiating settlement terms. The settlement terms were a pretense, a surface argument constructed to justify the meeting, to get her sitting across from him in public while he delivered a message he could later deny having sent. He had done this kind of thing before. He had a gift for creating situations where the abuse was completely real and completely deniable simultaneously. He was still talking, his Italian low and rapid and precise, and she was trying to catch more of it, but it was moving too fast, and his eyes were calm, almost pleasant, and she couldn't stand up because her legs felt hollow, and she couldn't make a scene because his lawyers would weaponize it, and she couldn't. Stai minacciando di sabotare il freno della sua macchina. The voice came from her left. Not loud, not theatrical, just present, arriving with the kind of quiet that cuts through noise precisely because it contains so much controlled force. Claire turned her head. A man was standing 4 feet away from their table. He had come from one of the corner booths, the ones positioned slightly behind a structural pillar that created a natural blind spot from the cafe entrance. He was tall, not dramatically so, but tall in a way that felt architectural, like he occupied space with deliberate intention. Dark hair, dark suit, no tie. Somewhere in his mid to late 30s, with the kind of face that had been through weather, not classically handsome the way Damien was handsome. This was something more asymmetrical, more lived in, harder around the edges. His eyes were on Damien, not on Claire. On Damien, with the steady, unhurried attention of something that has all the time in the world. He's threatening to sabotage your brake lines, the man continued, in English now, his voice carrying just far enough for the 2 occupied tables nearest them to hear clearly. He's also mentioned the woman on 86th Street. He knows her floor, her schedule, what time she leaves for work. He's describing something he plans to do to her if you don't agree to his terms. A brief pause. His Italian is excellent, by the way. His vocabulary for violence is especially precise. The cafe had gone quiet. Not completely. The espresso machines kept running. The ambient sound of the street continued through the windows. But the tables within radius of their corner had stilled, the way a forest goes quiet when something in it changes. Damien Vale was staring at the stranger with an expression Claire had never seen on his face before. She had seen him angry. She had seen him contemptuous, manipulative, performatively charming. She had seen him cruel in the specific, focused way of someone who had practiced cruelty until it became elegant. She had never seen him look small before. He looked small now. "I don't know who you are," Damien said. His voice had changed. The warmth was completely gone, replaced by something careful, something calculating, the sound of a man rapidly running probabilities. "No," the stranger agreed. "You don't." That was all. Just those two words, delivered with absolute stillness, and Damien Vale, who had put his hand through walls and terrorized a woman for 3 years and walked into restaurants like he owned them, said nothing else. He looked at the stranger for a moment longer, then looked at Claire with something that might have been calculation or might have been something uglier, then pushed his chair back from the table and stood. He picked up the manila folder. For a moment, Claire's heart seized. He was taking it. He was going to drag this out. She was going to have to start the entire process over. He set it back down. He straightened his jacket, buttoned the center button with practiced ease, and walked out of the cafe without another word. The bell above the door chimed his departure. Claire realized she was gripping the edge of the table hard enough that her knuckles had gone white. She released it carefully. She made herself breathe. In through the nose, out through the mouth, a technique she had learned from a therapist she had seen briefly before Damien started making comments about her fragility and the cost of the sessions. "He's not going to walk away from that and do nothing," the stranger said. He was still standing beside the table, not sitting, not moving toward her. Maintaining a deliberate distance, she noticed, even while speaking directly to her. "No," she agreed. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. "The things he described, he's already done preliminary work on some of them. The woman on 86th Street, your friend, he's had someone watching her building for at least a week. The brake line threat, I can't assess from here, but the surveillance on your movements is current. He wasn't improvising that." Claire looked up at him properly for the first time. He was watching her with an attention that wasn't intrusive but was very complete. The way a person watches something they are making a serious decision about. "How long were you sitting there?" she asked. "Long enough." "Why didn't you say something sooner?" "Because for the first several minutes he was only threatening you professionally. That didn't require my involvement." The slightest pause. "The brake lines required my involvement." She wanted to ask him why, what that distinction meant, what the threshold was, who he was that he sat in corner booths in Manhattan cafes making judgment calls about when to intervene in other people's dangerous marriages. But her hands were shaking now, the adrenaline finding its way through finally, and she needed a second before she could manage complicated questions. "Are you all right?" he asked. "I've been better." That's honest. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and produced a business card. He set it on the table in front of her, positioned so she could read it without picking it up. No corporate logo, just a name, Adriano Moretti, and a phone number. "If the situation escalates," he said, "call that number." "And who exactly answers that number?" "Someone who can help you with the kind of problem you currently have." She looked at the card. Clean cardstock, heavy weight, the name embossed rather than printed. "You make that sound very simple." "It isn't simple at all," he said, "but some problems are better handled by people who understand them." He left $300 bills on the table. His coffee, she realized, a cup of espresso sitting half-finished in the corner booth, and walked out through the back of the cafe toward what she assumed was a service exit or a side door, moving with the kind of purposeful, unhurried energy of a man who always knew exactly where the exits were. Claire sat alone at the table for a long time after that. She signed the divorce papers without Damien's signature. Her attorney would handle serving them, would handle whatever came next legally. And she held Adriano Moretti's business card in her hand and read the name 3 times, as if frequency would tell her something about the man it belonged to. Outside, the rain kept falling. That night, sitting in her friend Marta's apartment on the Upper West Side with the deadbolt thrown and the chain engaged, Claire told Marta everything. The Italian, the brake lines, Marta's name, her floor, her schedule. The stranger in the corner booth who had intervened with the calm of a man who was not remotely afraid of Damien Vale. Marta, who was practical above all things and had been telling Claire to leave Damien for 2 years before Claire finally listened, said, "You need to call that number. I don't know who he is." "You don't know who Damien is either, and you married him," Marta said flatly. "Call the number." Claire slept badly. She dreamed about Italian she couldn't understand, about a voice cutting through noise with the precision of a scalpel, about a pair of eyes that watched her with the kind of complete, unhurried attention that made her feel simultaneously seen and terrified. She called the number in the morning. It rang twice. Then, "Moretti?" Just his last name. Not a greeting, not a "how can I help you?" Just the name, stated with the same quiet certainty that everything else about this man seemed to carry. "This is Claire Whitaker," she said, "from the cafe yesterday." A brief pause. "I know who you are." Something about that should have alarmed her. Probably it should have alarmed her very much. "I want to know what you meant when you said you could help with my kind of problem." "I meant exactly that." "That's not an explanation." "No," he agreed. "An explanation requires a conversation. Are you available this afternoon?" She came to his townhouse on East 67th Street at 2 o'clock, which was earlier than he had suggested and 15 minutes before the time she had confirmed, because she had learned a long time ago that arriving early to unfamiliar places told you things about them that arriving on time never did. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment and looked at the building. It was remarkable. Or rather, it had been remarkable once, and was currently remarkable in the way that ruins are remarkable, through the visible evidence of what they once were. An 8-story limestone townhouse, probably built in the 1880s, with the kind of elaborate facade detailing that required master craftsmen and enough money not to care what anything cost. Arched windows, intricate cornices, a pair of stone urns flanking the entrance stairs that had probably once held elaborate plantings, and now held nothing but weather damage and ivy gone leggy and unmanaged. The building was clearly occupied. The front door looked recently maintained, the windows were intact, there were lights visible on the upper floors, but everything about it communicated a kind of accelerating neglect, like a very expensive thing that had been allowed gradually and then all at once to start coming apart. She rang the bell at 1:47 p.m. The door was opened not by Adriano Moretti, but by a woman in her 60s with silver-streaked hair pinned back severely and the expression of someone who had long since exhausted her tolerance for nonsense. She looked at Claire with the efficient assessment of a person who had been evaluating people at this door for years. "Ms. Whitaker," the woman said. It was not a question. "Yes. Mr. Moretti is expecting you. This way." The interior stopped her at the threshold. She was a restoration architect. She had spent 15 years rebuilding things that had been allowed to deteriorate, finding the integrity beneath the damage, coaxing the original design back into visibility. She had walked into hundreds of distressed buildings. She had learned to see through the surface damage to the bones underneath, to read the language of neglected architecture the way some people read weather. This building spoke to her immediately and urgently. The entrance hall was extraordinary, or had been. Marble floors in a geometric pattern, black and white, cracked in places but still present, still telling the story of the craftsman who had laid them. A central staircase of carved mahogany, the banister interrupted in 2 places where sections had been removed or had broken away, but the remaining sections still showing the extraordinary delicacy of the original carving. Plaster medallions on the ceiling, intact in some places, missing entire sections in others. Dusty chandeliers wrapped in plastic sheeting. The damage was real and significant, but beneath it, the bones were magnificent. Claire was so busy reading the architecture that she almost walked into Adriano Moretti, who was standing in the doorway of what appeared to be a library off the main hall, watching her take inventory of his ceilings with an expression she couldn't immediately categorize. "You're early," he said. "I'm always early." She pulled her attention from the plaster medallions with visible effort. "Your building is extraordinary. It's a disaster." "Those aren't mutually exclusive." She looked back up at the ceiling. "Is that original plasterwork, the medallions?" "Some of it. A previous owner did restorations in the 60s that I'm told were well-intentioned and terrible. Can I? She caught herself. She was here for a specific reason, involving a dangerous ex-husband and the need for help she didn't fully understand yet, and she was standing in a stranger's entrance hall asking to examine his plaster. Sorry, force of habit. Don't apologize. He stepped back from the doorway. Come in. The library was a room in the middle of becoming something else. Stacks of architectural drawings on the desk, paint samples taped to one wall in an organized grid, a folding table covered in contractor bids and material specifications. It was a working room, not a showroom, and it smelled like old paper and sawdust and the particular dusty, sweet smell of a building that had been holding its breath for a long time. Adriano Moretti in daylight looked different from Adriano Moretti in a rainy cafe. The cafe lighting had smoothed him out somewhat. Here, in the clear afternoon light coming through the tall, grimy windows, she could see the lines around his eyes, the specific kind of tension that lived in his jaw, the faint evidence of a scar along his left temple that disappeared into his hairline. He was lean in the way that looked like it had been earned, not maintained. He was not, she thought, a comfortable-looking person. But then comfortable-looking people had never actually made her feel safe. Sit down, he said, gesturing toward two leather chairs positioned near the fireplace, which was functional, she noticed, with wood stacked beside it and ash in the grate from recent use. I'll tell you what I can tell you. Then you can ask me what you want to ask me. She sat. He sat across from her, ankle crossed over knee, the kind of composed posture that wasn't practiced so much as structural. It seemed to just be how he occupied space. Your husband, ex-husband, she said, a fractional pause. Your ex-husband has a private investigation firm on retainer. The firm has been conducting surveillance on your movements for approximately 3 months. I became aware of this 6 weeks ago. Claire felt the familiar cold drop in her stomach. How did you become aware of it? Because the firm he's using occasionally operates in areas that overlap with my interests, and I make it my business to know what they're working on. He said it with the same tone someone might use to describe a mundane professional overlap, like knowing the projects of a firm in a shared office building. She heard what wasn't being said. She filed it without comment for now. What have they been telling him? Your schedule? Your regular locations? The address on 86th Street? The names of your current clients? The address of your office? A pause. Whether you're seeing anyone? The last item landed with a particular weight. He doesn't have any right to that information. No, he doesn't. Moretti's voice was unchanged, but something moved behind his eyes briefly. That isn't stopping him from collecting it. What do you want from me? She asked directly. Because you didn't come to that cafe by accident, and you didn't give me your card because you feel a general obligation to help strangers in distress. And you're not telling me this because it's free. So what is this? He looked at her for a moment. It was the same way he had looked at her in the cafe. Complete, unhurried, not invasive, but very thorough. The building needs a restoration architect, he said. It's been needing one for several years. I've met with 11 firms and rejected all of them for various reasons. Your firm has been on a list I've maintained for some time. You're offering me a job. I'm offering you a significant contract. The building is 8 stories, 18 rooms, plus service areas and rooftop terrace. The scope is extensive. The timeline is open. He paused. The compensation would reflect the scope. And the other part? There's no other part. It's a straightforward business arrangement. She stared at him. You just told me my ex-husband has a surveillance team tracking my movements and has threatened to sabotage my car and harm my friend. And your offer is that I come work in your building. Yes. You don't think those things are related? I think the contract stands on its own merits, he said. I also think that working from a base location that has its own security infrastructure, with drivers who can manage your transportation, would address some practical concerns about your current situation. Claire sat with that for a long moment. She was not naive. She had not been naive for a very long time, and whatever naivety she had once possessed had been efficiently removed by 3 years of marriage to Damien Vale. She understood that she was sitting in a room with a man who had appeared at a precise moment in a public space, who knew things about her private investigator situation that required his own intelligence gathering to know, who was now offering her a contract and, incidentally, security arrangements in the same breath. She understood that the word organized probably appeared somewhere in the description of the enterprise that had made Adriano Moretti's money. She also understood that Damien Vale had described cutting her brake lines in a language he didn't know she could partially understand, and that the police had told her, 18 months ago, when she had first tried to report his behavior, that there wasn't enough there to act on. "I'd need to see the full scope of the building," she said finally. "I don't sign contracts without a proper assessment. I'll want access to every floor, all original documentation if it exists. The contractor bids you already have so I can evaluate what's been proposed." "Of course. And I have conditions about how the work is managed. I run my own site. I make the design decisions. I don't work for clients who micromanage." "Understood. I also need to think about this for 24 hours. He nodded once, as if this was exactly the response he had expected. 24 hours. She stood. He stood with her. Old-fashioned, not performative, just a reflex of some kind. She picked up her bag and walked toward the library door, then stopped. "In the cafe," she said, without turning around. "You said you'd been sitting there long enough. Long enough to do what exactly? Long enough to decide whether you were going to intervene?" A pause. "Long enough to understand the situation. And if you had decided not to intervene, what would have happened?" "I don't know," he said, which was the most honest answer he had given her so far. "I made the decision I made." She left without asking him why. She spent 24 hours thinking about it, which mostly meant pacing Marta's apartment, calling her attorney to describe the meeting without exactly explaining who Adriano Moretti was, and standing at the window watching the street below in the way she had learned to watch streets, noting who was parked where, what moved, what stayed still. She noticed the black SUV that had been across the street when she arrived at Marta's building was gone by evening. She also noticed that the person she had vaguely registered near the corner coffee cart, nondescript, slightly too still, was gone the same time. Damien's surveillance. She was almost certain of it now. The next morning, she called the number again. "I'll take the contract," she said. "I'll come by Thursday to start the assessment." There was a pause on the line that lasted approximately 2 seconds and might have meant nothing. "Thursday?" he said. "Good." She arrived Thursday with her measuring equipment, her camera, her notebook, and her laptop loaded with every architectural database and reference resource she regularly used. She came prepared to work, because work was the only language she fully trusted, the only arena where she had always been completely sure of her own competence. She spent 6 hours walking every floor of the building. It was more extraordinary than she had imagined, more damaged, but more extraordinary. There were rooms she stopped in for long minutes just to understand what she was looking at. An upstairs sitting room where the original silk wall coverings were still present, faded nearly to nothing but present, the pattern still visible under raking light. A master bath with intact original tile work, hexagonal Carrara marble, improbable survivor of a century of weather and neglect. A rooftop terrace with views of the Manhattan skyline in every direction. The ironwork railing eaten with rust, but the layout intact. The bones of something that had once been someone's idea of paradise, still readable beneath the weather damage. She found Adriano Moretti on the top floor late in the afternoon, standing in a room that had been stripped to the studs, looking out a window at the skyline turning orange with the falling sun. He had his jacket off, his sleeves rolled to the elbow, which was the first time she had seen him without the full armor of the suit. She noticed the scar on his left forearm that matched the one on his temple, parallel lines that spoke of something specific and deliberate. He heard her come in and turned. "Well," he said. "It's going to take 2 years minimum," she said. "If you want it done right." "I want it done right. The budget conversations will be uncomfortable. Money isn't the obstacle." She looked at him across the bare, stripped room with the skyline going gold behind him, and the smell of old wood and plaster dust in the air, and something that had been tight in her chest for 3 years, maybe longer, maybe since before Damien, maybe since she had first learned that safety was something you had to construct and maintain and could lose without warning. Something in that tight place shifted very slightly. "Then we have a deal," she said. She drove herself home that night. Halfway down the FDR, she noticed the black SUV that had been behind her for 7 blocks. She noted the plate. She called the number from memory. "There's a car following me," she said. Black SUV, partial plate Lima Kilo 4. I see it, he said immediately. The cold surprise of that, I see it, present tense, immediate, landed in her stomach before she could process it. Are you? She checked her mirror again, saw nothing that looked like protection, saw only the ordinary chaos of Manhattan traffic. Where are you? Pull into the parking structure on 44th, level 3. Stay in your car. She pulled into the structure, drove to level 3, parked between two SUVs, and sat with her hands on the wheel and her phone pressed against her ear and her heart doing something complicated and too fast. She waited 7 minutes. Then her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. You're clear. The vehicle has been redirected. Redirected. She sat in the parking structure for another few minutes, just breathing, just letting the adrenaline metabolize into the ordinary feeling of being a person whose body had briefly thought it was in danger and was now recalibrating. She thought about the word redirected and all the things it might mean and decided deliberately and with full awareness not to ask. She started her car and drove to her apartment. The deadbolt, the chain, the window check that had become ritual. She did all of it automatically. She sat on her bed and looked at her phone and thought about a man who said, I see it in the present tense, while she was on a highway she hadn't told him she was on. She thought about what kind of man that made him. She thought about what kind of woman chose to work for that man anyway. Then she opened her laptop and started drafting the preliminary assessment report for the East 67th Street townhouse. Because work was what she had, and work was what she trusted. And somewhere in the back of her mind, something that felt uncomfortably like relief was beginning to take root in the space where fear used to live. Outside her window, Manhattan kept moving. Cabs and sirens, and the endless ambient roar of the city at night. Indifferent and relentless and full of things that happened in the dark between people who made choices with incomplete information. She had made her choice. She just didn't know yet how deep into his world that choice was going to take her. And in the stripped-down top floor of a crumbling townhouse 14 blocks away, Adriano Moretti stood at his window, looking out at the same city lights, and thought about a woman who had sat across from a dangerous man without crying, who had signed a contract with steady hands, who had looked at his ruined building and seen not the damage, but the bones. He thought about the way she had looked at the plaster medallions in the entrance hall with the same expression most people reserve for things that moved them. He thought about the fact that she was the first person in longer than he could clearly remember who had asked him a direct question and expected a real answer. He thought about the black SUV he had redirected and what would have happened if he had been 20 minutes slower, and how that thought produced a sensation in his chest that was not familiar to him and was not comfortable and was not something he was prepared to name yet. Below him, the city moved. Above him, the plaster ceiling of his ruined mansion held the memory of what it had once been, waiting to become something again. Neither of them slept much that night. The preliminary assessment report took Claire 4 days to complete, which was 2 days longer than it should have taken and 1 day shorter than she needed. She kept stopping. Not because the work was difficult, the work was the easiest part of everything currently happening in her life, but because the building kept interrupting her concentration with new things to look at, new things to measure, new evidence of original intention buried under decades of incremental damage. She found herself returning to the same rooms twice, sometimes 3 times, not because she had missed something technically, but because she wanted to understand them. The upstairs sitting room with the ghost of silk wall coverings. The kitchen level, stripped and gutted in the 90s, but with the original butler's pantry intact behind a false wall someone had installed and apparently forgotten. The narrow servant's staircase that ran from the basement to the 6th floor and was structurally sound and had the most extraordinary cast-iron newel posts she had ever seen in a private residence. It was, she had decided by the end of the 2nd day, the most interesting building she had ever been asked to work on, which was inconvenient given everything else. She saw Adriano Moretti briefly each day. He was present in the building but not intrusive, available when she had questions, absent when she was working, possessing the particular skill of some people who are very comfortable with silence in shared spaces. He did not hover. He did not second-guess her measurements or offer unsolicited opinions about design directions. He answered her questions directly and without padding, and when he didn't know something, he said so and found out. He was, professionally, almost exactly what she would have designed in a client, if she could have designed one. She was aware that this was itself a kind of information. On the fourth day, she sat across from him in the library with her laptop open and the preliminary report on screen and walked him through her findings section by section. He listened without interrupting. He asked 3 questions, all of them specific and technically informed, which told her he had done his own research at some point. The budget estimate for full restoration, she said, is between 4.2 and 5.8 million, depending on what we find once we open the walls. That range could shift in either direction. All right, that's a very large number. I'm aware of what it is. Some clients hear it and decide to do partial restoration. Prioritize the public rooms, leave the service areas utilitarian. I want to make sure you understand the full scope before we commit to a direction. He looked at her steadily. I want the full building restored, every floor, every room, including the servants' staircase. She blinked. You noticed the newel posts? I noticed you spent 40 minutes on that staircase yesterday morning. She felt her face do something she hadn't intended it to do. She looked back at her screen. The servants' staircase is structurally sound and the ironwork is exceptional. It would be a significant loss to... I just said I want it restored. Right. She closed her laptop. Then we have a direction. He poured 2 glasses of water from a carafe on the desk. He had a habit, she had noticed, of managing small practical things himself rather than calling for his housekeeper, Elena, to do them, and pushed one toward her side of the desk. The car that followed you Thursday, he said, without any transitional setup. The firm that runs it has been paid through the end of the month. After that, the contract with your husband becomes significantly more difficult for them to service. Claire felt the stillness that settled over her whenever he said something that she had to sit with for a moment. You're telling me you interfered with Damien's surveillance contract. I'm telling you that the firm's operating environment has become more complicated. That's a very elegant way of saying something quite specific. He met her eyes without shifting. Yes, she should have pushed back on this. She should have said something about boundaries, about the fact that she was a grown adult who could manage her own problems, about the fact that accepting this kind of help created a debt structure she didn't fully understand yet. She had the speech ready. She had given versions of it to herself in the mirror that morning. Instead, she said, "What about Marta? Someone drives past her building twice daily. If that changes, you'll be told." The water glass was cold in her hand. She set it down. I haven't agreed to any of this. No. You did it anyway. Yes. She looked at him for a long moment. His expression was even, patient, carrying none of the defensive energy that most people produced when they had done something that might be criticized. He looked like a man who had made a considered decision and was prepared to explain it once if asked, but would not apologize for it. Why? She asked. He was quiet for a moment, not the quiet of someone choosing a lie. She had been married to a man who chose lies, and she knew what that silence sounded like. This was the quiet of someone deciding how honest to be. Because the situation required it, he said, and because I was in a position to address it. That's not a complete answer. No, he agreed. It isn't. She waited. He didn't offer more. She decided for now to leave the incomplete answer where it was. She moved into the townhouse 11 days later. It was not her idea, initially. Adriano raised it as a practical suggestion. The commute from her apartment in Brooklyn was adding 90 minutes to her daily site work, and the building had a fully functional guest suite on the 4th floor that was better appointed than most apartments in the city. She could work longer hours, manage the contractors more effectively, save the commute time for actual restoration decisions. All of that was true. She knew it was true. She also knew that 3 days before he raised the suggestion, Damien had appeared outside her Brooklyn building at 11 p.m. She had seen him from her 3rd-floor window, just standing on the sidewalk across the street, looking up. Not doing anything, just standing there, letting her know that he knew where she was, that the removal of the surveillance firm had not removed him, that he was capable of managing his own watching. She had called the number. Adriano had answered on the first ring. By the time she looked out the window again, Damien was gone, and she didn't know what that meant or how it had happened and had felt, simultaneously, deeply relieved and deeply unsettled by her own relief. She moved into the 4th-floor guest suite on a Tuesday with 2 suitcases and her work bag and a box of reference books that Elena received at the door with the expression of a woman who had been expecting this development for some time. The suite was beautiful in the quiet, undramatic way of rooms that had been arranged by someone with genuine taste rather than money-performing taste. A four-poster bed with linen the color of old cream, built-in bookshelves that someone had actually filled with real books, not decorative books. Windows that looked out over the back garden, which was overgrown and lovely in the way that overgrown gardens get when they've been left alone long enough. She unpacked with the efficient speed of a person who had learned not to accumulate things that were difficult to leave behind. She was done in 40 minutes and stood in the center of the room and thought about the fact that she was living in a building owned by a man she had known for less than 3 weeks, whose source of income she had not directly addressed, whose interventions in her life she had accepted without full disclosure of cost. She thought about what her therapist, the one she had seen briefly before Damien started making it difficult, would have said about the decision-making process that had led her here. She thought about Damien on the sidewalk at 11 p.m., looking up at her windows. She went to work. The first week in the building established patterns quickly. Claire started work at 7 and rarely stopped before 8 in the evening. Contractors arrived at 8 and departed at 5. The hours between 5 and 8 were her favorite, when the building belonged to its own sounds, settling wood, the particular silence of old masonry at rest, and she could walk the floors and think without managing anyone. Adriano was present in the building most mornings and some evenings. He worked in the library. She could hear him through the floor sometimes, the low rumble of a voice on a phone call, occasionally visitors she heard but never saw. He ate dinner in the building most nights, and twice that first week Elena appeared at the library door at 7:30 to say that dinner was ready and to ask if Ms. Whitaker was joining. The first time Claire said yes mostly because she was hungry, and it was easier than going out. The second time she said yes because the previous dinner had been unexpectedly good and the conversation had been unexpectedly comfortable, which was a state she had not associated with dinner in years. They ate at the long table in the partially restored dining room by candlelight because the electrical work on that floor wasn't complete yet, and this created an atmosphere that was entirely accidental and slightly absurd. Tapered candles in century-old silver holders, good wine, a dining room that was half scaffolding and half grandeur, and the two of them at one end of a table built for 14. He asked her about her work, not in the polite, passing way that people asked about work to seem interested. He asked specifically, following up on things she said, remembering details from previous conversations, building a picture of how she thought about the relationship between original design intention and contemporary intervention. She asked him about the building's history, which he knew in detail, going back to the original owner, a shipping magnate who had commissioned it in 1887. He told her the history of the building without making it feel like a tour, moving through decades with the ease of someone who had spent real time with the material. "You care about it," she said one evening, slightly surprised by the realization. "It belonged to my grandfather," he said, "and his father before him. The family acquired it in 1923. A pause. "It has been neglected by every Moretti who inherited it, including me, until recently." What changed? He looked at her across the candles. "I decided I'd been neglecting things long enough." She didn't know entirely what he meant by that. She had the clear sense that it wasn't only about the building. That was the end of the second week. At the start of the third week, Damien's attorney sent a letter reopening the asset division. Claire sat with the letter in the library while Adriano stood near the window, and she read it twice and felt the specific familiar nausea of being back inside a problem she had thought was resolved. The letter was 12 paragraphs of elegant legal aggression, citing new evidence, claiming fraudulent concealment of assets, requesting a full financial disclosure review that would delay finalization of the divorce by a minimum of 6 months, and potentially much longer. "He's doing this because I moved," she said. "He knows I'm here. He's escalating because he thinks there's something here that he can use." Adriano had been quiet while she read. "What does your attorney say?" "My attorney says it's a delay tactic and that we can fight it, but it'll be expensive and time-consuming and designed to exhaust me." She set the letter down. "Which is exactly what it's designed to do. He's not trying to win, he's trying to make the process so painful that I give him better terms just to make it stop." "What terms does he actually want?" "Alimony. He put the business in a trust structure before we married, so most of his assets are protected, but there are 3 jointly owned investment properties, and he wants them all. He offered me one in the original settlement. She pressed her fingers against her eyes briefly. If I fight this new filing, my legal fees over the next 6 months will approach what the settlement property is actually worth. The room was quiet for a moment. Outside the window, a late September rain was starting, lighter than the rain from that first cafe morning, but the same gray quality of light. There are ways to address this, Adriano said. Something in his tone made her look at him directly. I know there are. I don't want to know what they are. Claire, I'm serious. She picked up the letter again, not to read it, but to have something in her hands. I know what you do. I haven't asked you to confirm it because I've preferred not to have it confirmed, but I understand enough to know that there are ways you could make this situation resolve very quickly, and I'm asking you not to. She made herself look at him steadily. This is my problem. I need to be able to solve it in a way that I can live with afterward. His jaw moved. She had learned, over 3 weeks of proximity, that this particular movement, slight, almost undetectable, was what passed for strong emotion in his face. He's not going to stop. I know. The letter is the formal version of what he's doing. The informal version is that he's been making calls. To your clients, to Calloway's office. His voice was flat, stating facts. He's describing you as unstable, as having abandoned a legitimate marriage for an association with a known criminal enterprise. The air in the room changed temperature somehow. Claire felt it in her skin. He's suggesting that your current residence raises questions about your judgment and your professional integrity. A pause. He used the phrase compromised contractor in a conversation with Calloway's assistant 3 days ago. She stood up. She did it without deciding to. Her body made the decision before her brain caught up, needing to be vertical, needing the physics of standing in order to manage what was happening in her chest. You've been monitoring his communications, she said. Yes? For how long? Since the cafe. She turned toward the window so she wasn't looking at him directly because she needed a second to decide what she felt about this before she had the conversation. Outside, the rain was picking up, tapping against the old glass with its uneven sound. She felt grateful, which was not what she wanted to feel. She also felt invaded, which was legitimate and real. She also felt the cold, concrete understanding that without that monitoring, she would have had no idea about the Calloway call, and she would have walked into a client meeting unprepared, and Damien would have been 3 moves ahead of her while she thought she was managing the situation. You should have told me, she said. Her voice was even. She was proud of that. Yes, he said. I should have. She turned around. He was watching her with that complete attention, braced in a way that was barely visible but present. The bracing of a person who has made a decision they stand behind but expects it to cost them something. What else? She said. A pause. What do you mean? What else have you been monitoring or managing or redirecting that I don't know about? I want everything, right now. He was quiet for 3 seconds that felt significantly longer. Then he laid it out. The surveillance firm. 2 other individuals Damien had approached about gathering information. A conversation Damien had with his own attorney in which he described specific intentions regarding Claire's professional reputation. The monitoring of Damien's own financial movements that Adriano had been conducting through channels he described briefly and without detail. She listened to all of it without interrupting. Her face felt very still while he talked, the way faces go still when they are processing information faster than emotion can keep up with. When he finished, she said, You've been running a parallel operation to protect me this entire time. I've been managing a situation that required management. That's not what I asked. He held her gaze. Yes, I have. Without telling me. Without telling you. She walked to the window and stood with her back to him for a moment, arms crossed, watching the rain hit the overgrown garden. She was trying to locate, in the complicated territory of what she was currently feeling, the thing that was most important to respond to first. I need you to understand something, she said, without turning around. I spent 3 years with a man who made decisions for me, who decided what I knew and when I knew it, and what I was capable of handling, who thought that managing the information I received was protecting me. She paused. It wasn't protection. It was control. And I cannot be in a situation that feels like that again. She heard him move, not toward her, just a shift of weight. What I did is not the same thing. You decided what I knew. I decided what I told you when, based on what was actionable. That's different from hiding things to maintain power over you. His voice was still flat, but there was something underneath it now, something with more force. Damien kept you in the dark so you couldn't defend yourself. I was trying to remove the threats before they reached you. She turned around. And you don't see any problem with how similar those justifications sound? He looked at her for a moment. His jaw did the thing. Yes, he said. I see the problem. The honesty of it landed differently than she expected. They stood on opposite sides of the room with the rain outside and the candles starting to gutter in a draft from somewhere. Old buildings breathed, she knew that, air moving through century-old walls in ways that architects and historians could map, but never fully predict. I need you to tell me things, she said, when they're happening, not after you've already handled them. I need to be in the decisions. All right. I mean it. I understand what you mean. She studied him. He was not a man who made promises easily. She had learned that about him in 3 weeks of proximity, that his statements tended to be measured, that he said less than he meant and meant exactly what he said, which meant that all right from him was not a dismissal or a placation. She let out a breath. The Calloway situation. I need to handle that myself. I need to call Marcus directly before Damien's version of events becomes the dominant narrative. Agreed. And I need my attorney to respond to the letter immediately, aggressively. I'm not going to let him drag this out. She picked up the letter from the desk. If it costs me more than the settlement property is worth to fight it, then I'll let the property go and take the financial hit, but I will not give him the settlement he wants. I won't. That's the right call, Adriano said. She looked at him. You've been carrying the situation for weeks, she said, and it wasn't quite a question. Making decisions, managing outcomes, running surveillance on a man who threatened my life. She paused. How many other situations are you managing right now? A silence that had specific texture. Several. Does that... She stopped, started again. Is this what your life looks like, all the time? He looked at her with an expression she couldn't entirely read. More or less. How do you live like that? He was quiet for a moment. You find what's worth protecting, he said, and you protect it. She understood at that moment several things simultaneously, that she was one of the things he had decided was worth protecting, that this decision on his part was not simple or casual or without cost to him, that the man standing across from her in a half-restored dining room in the rain had not arrived at the decision to involve himself in her life by accident or even primarily by business logic, and that the thing she was feeling right now, standing in his building, in the middle of his protection, on the far side of a fight that wasn't over, was not gratitude and not obligation and not the complicated debt feeling she had worried about in the beginning. She was aware, with the quiet alarm of a person discovering something they hadn't intended to discover, that she was beginning to trust him, not the way she had trusted Damien once, which had been hope mistaken for evidence. This was different. This was something built from watching a person make decisions under pressure and seeing the shape of their values and how they made them. Trust built from observation was the only kind she had any faith in anymore. She was afraid of it anyway. She went upstairs to call Marcus Calloway, and she made the call standing at the window of her fourth-floor suite with the rain coming down harder now and the garden below disappearing into gray. And Marcus was direct and honest with her, told her he'd received a call from a man claiming to represent Damien, told her he had hung up without engaging, told her that her work spoke for itself, and no one in his office was entertaining anonymous character attacks. She thanked him and hung up and stood for a long moment at the window. Then she called her attorney and told her to respond to the letter with everything they had. 2 days later, the response was filed. 2 days after that, Damien Vale showed up at the townhouse. Claire was on the 3rd floor when it happened, deep in a discussion with the lead contractor about the plaster repair specifications for the central hallway, when she heard the raised voices from the entrance hall below. She stopped mid-sentence. The contractor stopped with her, both of them going still, the way people go still when the sound quality of a building changes. She went to the top of the staircase and looked down. Damien was in the entrance hall. He had gotten past the front door somehow. Elena, Claire guessed, or a momentary gap in the building's protocols. And he was standing in the marble entrance hall looking up at the scaffolding and the dusty chandeliers and the contractor's equipment with an expression of contemptuous assessment. And Adriano Moretti was standing 4 feet away from him. Claire had seen Adriano in a number of situations in the weeks since she had known him. She had seen him patient, precise, occasionally tense in the controlled way of someone managing significant competing demands. She had never seen him like this. He was absolutely still, which somehow communicated more threat than any movement would have. His arms were at his sides. His face was completely flat, the way faces go flat when all the surface expressions have been removed to make room for something much more basic. He looked, she thought, from the top of the staircase, exactly like the thing Damien should be afraid of. Damien was talking. She could hear his voice, but not the specific words from this distance. His tone was the one she knew as his negotiating tone. The blend of authority and reasonableness that he used when he wanted to seem like the adult in a room. He was gesturing slightly, looking around the entrance hall, making a point about something. Adriano said nothing. Damien kept talking. His voice shifted register slightly, less negotiating, more pointed. He looked toward the staircase, and Claire pressed herself slightly back from the railing, and she wasn't sure if he saw her or not, but his expression changed, became more fixed on whatever point he was trying to make. Then Adriano spoke. She couldn't hear the words from the 3rd floor, but whatever he said it once, quietly, and Damien Vale stopped talking in the middle of a sentence. A silence stretched in the entrance hall below. Then Damien looked up the staircase directly at Claire, and the look on his face was something she had never seen from him before. Not rage, which she knew, not contempt, which she knew. Something colder and more deliberate. A message delivered without words, a promise of future consequence, patient and specific. Then he looked back at Adriano, and whatever he saw there made him button his jacket the way he had buttoned it in the cafe, that practiced single-button motion, and he walked out. The front door closed. The entrance hall held its silence for a moment. Then Elena appeared from somewhere and closed the inner vestibule door with her particular quality of disapproval at the state of things, and the contractor on the 3rd floor cleared his throat beside Claire, and the building went back to its ordinary working sounds. Claire's hands were flat against the staircase railing. She made herself release it. She walked downstairs. Adriano was still standing in the entrance hall looking at the front door. He turned when he heard her on the stairs. His face was returning from wherever it had been, the surface expressions reassembling. "What did he say?" she asked. "Nothing you need to hear." "That's not what we agreed," she said, and her voice came out sharper than she intended because her heart was still doing its too fast thing and her hands were still cold. He looked at her for a moment, then, "He came to make sure I understood that anything I've done to complicate his situation will be matched. He wanted me to understand that he is not manageable." "And what did you say to him?" Adriano's expression did something she had never seen it do before. Not quite a smile, so more the ghost of one, without warmth. "I told him he was welcome to try." She stood on the bottom step of the scarred mahogany staircase and looked at the man at the bottom of it and thought about Damien's face looking up at her from the entrance hall, that cold, deliberate look that had promised something specific and patient and bad. "He's not going to stop," she said. She said it the way she had said it before, in the library, but it landed differently now, not as an assessment of a problem, but as the acknowledgement of a truth that had fully arrived. "No," Adriano said, "he's not." The entrance hall smelled like old marble and sawdust and the faint outdoor smell of rain from the opened front door. The chandeliers above them, still wrapped in their plastic sheeting, hung in their dusty suspension. Somewhere above them, the contractor was moving, the sound of his footsteps crossing plaster subfloor. "What happens next?" she asked. Adriano looked at her. In his eyes was something he wasn't saying, something he was making a decision about whether to say, and she could see the decision happening. Could see, for the first time, the full weight of whatever he was carrying that he usually kept entirely contained. "He found something," Adriano said, "about me, about my history." A pause. "He's going to use it." The temperature of the room seemed to drop slightly. What did he find? Adriano was quiet for a moment that had significant weight. "Everything," he said. And Claire understood, standing on the bottom step of a ruined, magnificent staircase in a building that was slowly coming back to life. that whatever came next was going to be worse than anything that had come before, and that she was, despite everything, exactly where she intended to be. She didn't sleep that night, not the restless half-sleep of anxiety, not the exhausted, shallow unconsciousness she had learned to function on during the worst years of her marriage. Full insomnia, lying on her back in the four-poster bed, staring at the ceiling plasterwork she had already cataloged and measured, and could now trace from memory in the dark, her mind running the same loop with the persistence of something that had decided this problem was more important than rest. Everything. He had found everything. She turned that word over and over. It was a specific word. Adriano had chosen it deliberately. He was not a man who reached for imprecision, which meant it was not exaggeration, not anxiety producing a worst-case estimate. It was a statement of actual fact. Damien Vale, who had the money and the patience and the motivated cruelty to dig until he found what he was looking for, had found everything there was to find about Adriano Moretti. And Adriano, who had looked at her after saying it with the expression of a man lowering a very heavy thing he had been carrying alone for a long time, had not told her what everything meant. She had asked. He had said, "Tomorrow. Let me make some calls tonight." She had accepted that because she could see he needed the hours, and because she was honest enough with herself to acknowledge that she was not entirely sure she was ready to hear it yet. There was a version of tomorrow's conversation that would require her to make decisions she wasn't prepared for tonight, standing on a staircase with her hands still cold from watching Damien look up at her like a man marking a target. So she lay in the dark and traced ceiling plaster and waited for morning. He was already in the library when she came downstairs at 6:45. The room smelled like coffee and the particular staleness of a space where someone has been working through the night. A quality of used air, papers rearranged, the faint acidity of concentration. He was at the desk with his jacket off and his sleeves rolled, which she had come to understand as his working state, and there were 3 stacks of documents in front of him that had not been there yesterday. He looked up when she came in. His face was tired in the specific way of someone who had not slept but had been productive rather than just wakeful. There were shadows under his eyes that she hadn't seen before. "Sit down," he said. Not unkindly, just direct. She sat in the chair across the desk. Elena appeared with coffee without being asked, set 2 cups down, and left with the efficiency of a woman who had learned when rooms required her absence. Adriano looked at the coffee, then at Claire. He had the posture of someone organizing a significant amount of information into a linear sequence, deciding where to begin. "My family," he said, "has been involved in organized crime in New York since 1931. My great-grandfather established the initial enterprise. My grandfather expanded it. My father inherited it and ran it until he died 12 years ago." A pause. "I inherited it at 31. Claire held her coffee cup and said nothing. She had known this, in the structural way that you know something you have chosen not to examine directly. Hearing it stated was different. It had weight and texture that the unexamined version didn't. The current operation involves approximately 40 people in direct employment and a significantly larger network of affiliated enterprises. Import, construction, waste management, several legitimate businesses that function as they appear to function, and several that don't." He was watching her face while he said this, not defensively, but with the attention of someone monitoring for the specific kind of response that would end the conversation. "I have been investigated by federal authorities 4 times. I have never been charged. This is partly because my attorneys are excellent, and partly because the investigations have consistently lacked the witness cooperation required to build a prosecutable case." "Why haven't they had witness cooperation?" she asked. She knew the answer. She needed to hear him say it. "Because people who might testify understand the personal cost of doing so," he said evenly. "And because I have spent 12 years ensuring that the direct evidence connecting me to specific operations is managed carefully." She set down her coffee cup. "When you say managed, I mean that I am not stupid, and I am not careless." He held her gaze. "I have not personally committed the acts of violence that the people who work for me have committed. I have given orders that resulted in those acts. That distinction matters legally. It does not particularly matter morally." The last sentence arrived with a flatness that told her he had thought about this, repeatedly and seriously, without the comfort of self-justification. "What did Damien find?" she asked. Adriano turned one of the document stacks toward her. A federal investigation that was closed 18 months ago. It concerned a specific contracting arrangement in the construction sector, bid manipulation, payments to union officials, 2 instances of property destruction that discouraged competing bids. He paused. One of those instances resulted in a fire. The building was unoccupied. No one was hurt. The investigation closed when the key witness withdrew cooperation. She looked at the documents without touching them. And Damien has this. He has a copy of the investigative file. I don't yet know how he obtained it. That's under review. The file contains enough to make my life extremely complicated if it reaches the right people. He paused. Or the wrong people. He's going to use it to threaten you into withdrawing your... She stopped. He wants you to stop protecting me. He wants more than that. Adriano's voice was unchanged, but his jaw had the tightness she recognized. He's proposing a specific arrangement. He withdraws the divorce complications, stops the surveillance, and the file remains private. In exchange, I remove my involvement from the situation entirely and confirm, through my attorney, that I have no ongoing relationship with you. Claire heard the words and understood them and sat with them for a moment. He wants you to tell him there's nothing between us, she said. He wants me to confirm that you are not under my protection. The word protection landed with all its complicated freight, which would leave you in the position you were in before the cafe. Without the surveillance complications, yes, he's offering to remove those, but also without any structural barrier to his other plans. The brake lines, she said, among other things. She stood up. She needed to move, the same reflex as the library 2 days ago. Her body deciding that standing was more compatible with processing this than sitting was. She walked to the window. The garden was gray in the early morning light, the overgrown roses holding the last of their October color, the ironwork of the perimeter fence going dark with morning damp. He'll hurt you, she said to the window. If you don't take the deal, he'll send the file wherever it does the most damage. Yes. And if you do take the deal, then you're alone with a man who has already demonstrated what he does to you when no one is watching. She turned around. This is not a real choice. No, he agreed. It isn't. She looked at him across the room. He was watching her with that complete attention, and she could see beneath the controlled surface the weight of what he was carrying. Not fear. She didn't think he experienced fear in the ordinary register, but something that functioned like it. Something that cared about outcome. Something that was not, she understood now with sudden clarity, primarily about self-preservation. You're not afraid of the file, she said slowly. He was quiet. You could manage the file. It's 12 years of careful management. You said so yourself. You have attorneys, and you have resources, and you have the kind of relationships that make investigations fail. The file is a problem, but it's not a fatal problem. She paused. You're afraid of what happens to me if you take the deal. Yes, he said. The word fell into the room and occupied it. She sat back down. She pressed her fingertips to her temples and thought, hard and fast, the way she thought when she was on a job site and something structural had failed and she needed to find the solution before the problem became irreversible. She thought about Damien's face in the entrance hall. She thought about everything. She thought about 12 years of careful management and 40 people in direct employment and a closed federal investigation, and a man who had sat in a corner booth in a cafe and decided that brake lines were the threshold. Tell me about the fire, she said. Adriano's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. You don't need... Tell me about the fire. A pause. Then, a competing contractor was underbidding a project that had been committed to one of my affiliated companies. The project was significant. The competing contractor received warnings that were not taken seriously. He stopped. A supply warehouse owned by the competing contractor experienced a fire. It was ruled arson. The investigation identified a connection to my organization. The contractor withdrew from competition, and the contract was awarded as intended. She listened to every word. She did not let her face do anything she hadn't decided it would do. Was anyone in the warehouse? She said. No. You made sure of that. He looked at her steadily. Yes. She thought about that for a moment. The distinction he had drawn. The distinction that mattered legally and didn't particularly matter morally. The moral weight of giving an order versus executing one. The moral weight of ensuring a building was empty versus burning it regardless. She was not going to pretend these were clean distinctions. She was also not going to pretend that Damien Vale, who had described cutting her brake lines in a language he thought she couldn't understand, occupied simpler moral territory. "What does Damien want from me?" she asked. "Specifically, the 3 properties and a statement from you for the divorce record, confirming irreconcilable differences without fault attribution. He wants to walk away clean. No record of abuse, no financial penalty, everything split on his terms." "And then what? He just lets me go? After all of this?" Adriano's expression told her what he thought of that scenario. "He won't," she said, "even if I give him everything he wants. He won't just let me go." "No," Adriano said, "I don't believe he will." She thought about what that meant. She thought about it fully and without flinching, the way she had learned to think about difficult structural realities, not around them, not past them, directly at them. Damien had spent 4 months escalating a situation that he could have simply allowed to resolve. He had hired investigators, made calls to her clients, appeared outside her building at night, showed up at a townhouse belonging to a man he knew was dangerous. This was not the behavior of a man who wanted a clean exit. This was the behavior of a man for whom the exit was not the point. The point was the making of her life small enough and frightened enough and compromised enough that she could never fully leave him, even after the legal document was signed. This was the thing she had been trying to name for months, the thing her attorney skirted around with careful language, and her therapist had been trying to help her articulate before she stopped going. It wasn't about the properties. It wasn't about the settlement terms. It was about ensuring that wherever she went, he had been there first, had laid enough wreckage that she would always be standing in it. She had known this. She had known it and been trying to survive it one day at a time. Sitting across from Adriano Moretti in his library in the gray October morning, she realized that surviving it one day at a time was not going to be enough. Her phone rang. She looked at the screen, her attorney, Rachel Brenner, calling at 7:14 in the morning, which was not a time Rachel Brenner called unless something had happened. She answered. "Claire." Rachel's voice was controlled in the way that trained legal professionals controlled their voices when delivering bad news. "I need you to hear something before you see it anywhere else. There's a piece running this morning. It appears to be going up in the next hour in a financial news outlet. It's about Adriano Moretti and his business connections. It includes references to your current living situation and professional relationship." The cold dropped through her stomach. "What outlet?" Rachel named it. It was not a tabloid. It was not gossip. It was a financial and business publication with genuine readership and legitimate credibility, the kind of outlet that Damien's World, the fundraising galas, the investor dinners, the social infrastructure of New York wealth, actually read and referenced. "Who gave them the story?" Claire said, though she already knew. "The sourcing is anonymous. The information is specific enough that it had to come from someone with direct access to investigative records." A pause. "Claire, the piece mentions your name. It describes you as a contractor currently employed by and residing in the home of a known organized crime figure. It raises questions about your professional judgment and suggests that some of your current client relationships may benefit from review." Claire was aware of Adriano watching her from across the desk. She kept her voice level. "How bad is it?" "It's bad enough that Marcus Calloway's office is going to see it. It's bad enough that every client you currently have or are pursuing is going to see it. It's bad enough that—" Rachel paused. "It's bad enough that I'm calling you at 7 in the morning." She thanked Rachel and ended the call and set the phone on the desk with the careful placement of someone managing their own hands. "The file," she said. "He didn't wait." Adriano's face had gone very still. "He moved faster than I expected. When did he send it?" "Last night, apparently." Something moved behind his eyes. "While we were having the conversation in the entrance hall, he had already sent it." She understood what that meant, that the visit, the confrontation, Adriano's message about being welcome to try, all of it had happened after Damien had already lit the fuse. He had come to the townhouse not to negotiate but to watch the ignition, to see Adriano's face when he realized the timeline. "He played you," she said. "Yes." Flat and absolute. "He did." She looked at her phone, In 45 minutes, an article was going live that would attach her name to an organized crime investigation and raise questions about her professional integrity to every person in her industry who mattered. The Callaway contract, which was the largest project of her career and the foundation of the next 3 years of her professional trajectory, would be under immediate review. The 3 other active clients she currently had would read the same piece and make their own calculations. She had built her professional reputation over 15 years. She had rebuilt it specifically and carefully over the 3 years of her marriage, during which Damien had consistently undermined her confidence and occasionally her opportunities, and she had rebuilt it anyway, project by project, through the quality of the work itself. In 45 minutes, Damien was going to take a hammer to the foundation of that rebuilding. "Can it be stopped?" she asked. "The piece? No. It's already formatted. Once it's submitted to publication, the outlet's decision is independent." He paused. "I have a call into someone with influence at the outlet. I'm waiting to hear back, but the timeline makes it very unlikely." And the other calls he made, "To my clients, before today. Those are already in motion. I've been monitoring them but not intervening, at your request." There it was, at your request. She had asked him to let her handle her own problems. She had drawn the line about intervention. And she had been right to draw it, for the reasons she had drawn it, and Damien had known exactly what that line would cost her. He had waited for her to establish her own terms and then weaponize them. She stood up again. She walked to the window again. She stood there and looked at the garden and thought about what she was about to lose and made herself look at it directly, the way she made herself look at structural damage directly, without softening it, without hoping it was better than it was, with the full clinical clarity of someone who needed to understand the actual extent of the problem before they could begin to fix it. Her phone buzzed. A text from Marcus Callaway's personal cell, not his office line. She read it. "Heard something may be coming out. Call me before 8. She called him. Marcus Callaway was 62 years old, had built his real estate development company over 30 years, had a traditional manner that she had always found slightly formal but genuinely respectful, and had given her the biggest contract of her career based on a portfolio review in 2 meetings. He answered on the second ring. "Claire." His voice was careful. "I'm going to ask you directly, and I expect a direct answer." "All right." "Are you currently living with Adriano Moretti?" A pause that lasted approximately 1 second. "I'm currently working from the building I've been contracted to restore. I have temporary residency there for the duration of the project, yes." "And is Adriano Moretti connected to organized criminal enterprise in New York?" She looked at Adriano across the room, who was watching her with an expression she couldn't read. "He is a complex figure with complex business interests," she said. "The project I'm working on for him is a legitimate architectural restoration contract." "Claire," Callaway's voice shifted. "I'm going to be honest with you. I've received 2 calls in the past week about your professional judgment. I dismissed them because your work speaks for itself. But if a piece comes out this morning in a credible outlet that connects your name to an organized crime investigation, I am going to be in an impossible position with my board and my investors." A pause. "I need you to tell me this isn't what it appears to be." She thought about all the things she could say, all the ways she could frame it, contextualize it, present the legitimate dimensions of the work and the personal circumstances that had led to the living arrangement and the professional integrity that had never wavered for 15 years. She thought about Damien designing this exact moment, the calls before the article timed to arrive before she could respond, the framing that would make any explanation sound defensive, the audience, Callaway's board, his investors, her other clients, who would read the piece and then read any response she offered through the lens of the piece. "Marcus," she said, "I need 24 hours. A silence. "The piece will be out in under an hour." "I know. I'm asking for 24 hours before you make any decisions about the contract. I will have a response to everything in that article within that time." Another silence. She could hear him thinking, the particular quality of silence a careful man produces when he's running risk calculations. 24 hours, he said finally. "But Claire, this is the kind of thing that has a life of its own once it starts. You understand that?" "I understand." She ended the call. She set the phone down. She looked at Adriano. "I need to know everything," she said. "Not the version you've decided I can handle. Not the version that protects me from the details. Everything about your operation, your exposure, your current legal status, and what Damien actually has versus what you think he has. She paused. Because whatever I do in the next 24 hours, I need to be doing it with complete information. He looked at her for a moment. Something shifted in his face, not dramatically, just a slight adjustment of the layers, something underneath becoming briefly visible. That's going to be a long conversation, he said. Then we'd better start. They were 40 minutes into it when Elena knocked and opened the library door with the expression she reserved for emergencies, which was identical to her expression for everything else, except for a specific tightness around her eyes. "There's a man at the door," she said. "He says he's a federal agent. He has a badge." A pause. "He says he has a warrant." The room went completely still. Claire looked at Adriano. His face had closed in a way she had never seen. Not the controlled evenness she had become familiar with, but something harder, something that had shut all the way down. He was on his feet before Elena finished the second sentence, and in the movement from chair to standing, she saw, for the first time, the full physical reality of who he was. Not the restoration project client, not the man who ate dinner by candlelight and asked thoughtful questions about architectural intention, but the other thing, the thing that lived beneath all of that and had built this empire and given the orders and ensured the buildings were empty. "Elena," he said, "show him into the front room. Tell him I'll be there in 2 minutes." Elena left. He looked at Claire. "This is connected to what Damien sent," he said. His voice was completely flat. "The timing makes it certain." "What does the warrant cover?" "I won't know until I read it." He picked up his jacket from the back of the chair. "I need you to go upstairs." "I'm not going upstairs?" "Claire, I said I'm not going upstairs." She stood. "If a federal agent is in this building, I am not the kind of person who hides in her room. That's not who I am, and it's not going to be who I am because of this situation." He looked at her. In his eyes was something that was neither argument nor agreement, an assessment, rapid and complete. "Then stay in this room," he said. "Don't come into the front room unless I ask you to." She stayed in the library. She heard voices from the front room, Adriano's, low and controlled, and another voice she didn't know, business flat in the way of people whose professional register had been trained out of personal inflection. She couldn't make out words. She stood near the library door with her arms crossed, and her breathing deliberately slow and her mind running every implication of this development in rapid succession. Damien had sent the file to the federal authorities, not just to the press, to the actual investigative infrastructure that had previously tried and failed to prosecute. The article was the public face. The warrant was the machinery. This was not a threat. Damien had not used the file as leverage. He had used it as a weapon. He had detonated it without negotiation, without waiting for a response, without leaving any version of the situation intact. She thought about standing in the entrance hall watching Damien look up at her. She thought about the way he had buttoned his jacket before walking out. She thought about what she had missed in that moment, had seen as satisfaction, had interpreted as him accepting defeat. It hadn't been defeat. It had been someone watching the timer on something that was already running. The voices in the front room went on for 11 minutes. Then she heard the front door open and close. Adriano came back into the library. He stood in the doorway for a moment. His jacket was on. His face was the controlled flat that she had learned was not actually absence of expression, but a very specific kind of management. Everything present, nothing released. "Warrant for financial records," he said. 3 years of records from specific entities. I have 48 hours to produce them." A pause. "My attorney is already involved." "Is this survivable?" she asked. He looked at her. "Legally? Yes. With time and resources, yes." Another pause. "Professionally, in terms of the business operations, some things will need to change. Significantly. And personally?" He was quiet for a moment that had the specific texture of someone arriving at something they had been approaching for a long time. "That depends," he said, "on decisions that aren't entirely mine to make." She understood what he meant. She understood it completely and immediately. That the 48-hour warrant and the article and the Callaway contract and the 3 properties and the 3 years of careful management under federal scrutiny were all currently in the same room as the decision about what exactly she and Adriano Moretti were to each other and what that meant for both of them going forward. She had come to his building to restore architecture. She had come because of a dangerous ex-husband and a business card in the absence of better options. She had not come to be standing in a library at 7:45 in the morning with a federal warrant in the building and a piece about to go live and her professional life in active collapse, looking at a man who ran a criminal empire and had spent months protecting her from the specific consequences of the empire he ran being used against her. She had not planned any of this. She also understood, with the cold clarity of a woman who had stopped lying to herself about important things, that somewhere in the past 6 weeks she had stopped thinking of this building as a place she was working and started thinking of it as somewhere she had chosen to be. That distinction was going to matter very soon. Her phone buzzed again. She looked at it. A message from an unknown number. No words, just a photo. The photo showed Marta's apartment building on 86th Street, taken from across the street, time-stamped 40 minutes ago. Marta's third-floor window was lit. The message was clear without being stated. I know where she is. I know she's home. The protections around her are currently occupied elsewhere. Claire looked at the photo. She looked at Adriano. She looked at the photo again. He's not done, she said, her voice coming out very quiet. The warrant, the article. That wasn't the end. That was to pull your attention here. She held up the phone. Marta. Adriano looked at the photo. Something happened in his face that was not any of the controlled things she had seen before. Something that was simply, without management, fury. He reached for his own phone. But Claire was already moving toward the door because she understood now that waiting for protection was not the same as being protected, and that the woman in the third-floor window 40 minutes ago had nothing to do with divorce settlements or architectural contracts or federal warrants or criminal empires. She was Claire's oldest friend, and Claire had run out of time for being careful. Claire was out the library door before Adriano finished dialing. She heard him say her name, sharp, with the specific edge of a man who was not accustomed to people moving faster than his instructions. But she was already in the entrance hall, already pulling her coat from the hook by the vestibule, already running the math on 40 minutes in a lit window, and a woman who left for work at 8:15 and had no idea that the photograph on Claire's phone existed. Adriano caught her at the front door. Not grabbing. He didn't grab. He put himself between her and the door with a speed that she hadn't anticipated from a man who usually moved with such deliberate economy, and she pulled up short because the alternative was walking directly into him. You can't go out there alone, he said. Then come with me. I have 2 men outside, but they're on the warrant situation. I need 60 seconds to redirect them. His voice was controlled, but the control was working harder than usual. 60 seconds. She looked at her phone. The timestamp on the photo was 43 minutes ago now. 30, she said. He was already on the phone. He spoke in Italian, fast and low, the same rapid-fire Italian that Damien had used in the cafe, except that this felt entirely different. Not threat, not cruelty, but the compressed efficiency of a man who had been giving operational instructions for 12 years and had never once needed to repeat himself. He was done in 20 seconds. Cars coming around, we go together. Adriano? Together, he said. Non-negotiable. She didn't argue. There wasn't time to argue, and she was honest enough to acknowledge that she didn't want to. The car was a dark sedan, already running, a man she had seen in the building before at the wheel. Late 30s, broad through the shoulders, with the particular quality of stillness that she had come to associate with the people in Adriano's orbit who were not employees in any ordinary sense of the word. Adriano put her in the back seat and got in beside her, and the car was moving before the door was fully closed. Her schedule, Adriano said. She leaves at 8:15, takes the 86th Street crosstown to the east side. Claire was watching her phone, watching for another message from the unknown number that didn't come. She's a physical therapist. Her first appointment is at 9. She's religious about being early. It's 7:52, 23 minutes. Claire felt the arithmetic of it in her chest, a tight mechanical feeling that was not quite panic because panic was useless. And she had trained herself out of useless responses over 3 years of marriage to a man who used her panic against her. But something adjacent to panic, something with the same physical signature, shallow breathing, cold hands, the specific hyper-clarity that arrived when the body understood the stakes were real. What does he want with her, she asked, though she already knew. Leverage, Adriano said. Demonstration. He's had a bad 48 hours. The conversation in the entrance hall didn't go the way he planned. The legal response to his filing was more aggressive than he expected. He needs to reestablish that he has reach you can't neutralize. By threatening Marta. By touching Marta, a threat he's already demonstrated he can carry out. The car hit a red on 65th and the driver didn't hesitate. Through the intersection, a taxi horn blaring behind them, the smooth mechanical acceleration of a vehicle with a great deal of engine under the hood. Claire gripped the door handle without thinking about it. The man he's using, she said, the one who took the photograph, is he? One person, possibly two. Adriano was on his phone again, reading something. He's not sending an army. This is a message operation, not an extraction. What's the difference? An extraction requires preparation and clean exit routes. A message operation requires one person to do one thing visible enough that the target understands it was intentional. He looked up from the phone. He wants Marta frightened. He wants you to receive that fear and understand that his reach is longer than your response time. Then we make sure we get there before his reach does. The car turned north on Columbus with the particular aggression of a driver who had been instructed to prioritize speed over comfort, and Claire felt each lane change in her spine and kept her eyes on the street ahead and thought about Marta's apartment, third-floor walk-up, single lock on the building door, intercom that sometimes worked and sometimes didn't, a fire escape on the east side of the building that anyone could access from the alley. She thought about Marta, who was practical and brave, and had told Claire to call the number when Claire was still debating whether to trust a stranger, and who had no framework for the thing that was currently moving toward her building because she had never had reason to build one. I should have told her more, Claire said. It came out flat, a statement of fact rather than self-recrimination, but it carried weight. Adriano looked at her. You told her what you knew when you knew it. I knew more than I said. I knew what he was capable of, and I kept it vague because I didn't want to frighten her. She kept looking at the street. That was the same thing Damien did to me, managing information to manage the person. Adriano was quiet for a moment. That's not the same thing. Isn't it? Damien managed your information to keep you contained. You managed Marta's because you were trying to protect her from fear she couldn't do anything with. He paused. The intention isn't the only thing that matters. But it isn't nothing. She absorbed that without responding. The car hit 86th Street at 7:58, 4 minutes to the building. Her phone buzzed. She had looked at it with the lurching certainty that it was another photograph, something worse, something time-stamped in the last few minutes. But it was Rachel Brenner. She answered. The piece went live 2 minutes ago, Rachel said, without preamble. I've already had 2 calls from journalists asking for comment. I've said nothing. Calloway's office called, not Marcus himself, his communications director, asking for a statement. A pause. Claire, how do you want to handle this? Not right now, Claire said. I understand the timing is, Rachel, not right now. A silence. Call me when you can. She ended the call. Put the phone in her pocket, kept her eyes on the street. The car stopped half a block from Marta's building at 8:01, 14 minutes until Marta's usual departure. Adriano was out of the car the same moment Claire was, the driver staying behind them, and Claire was already scanning the street the way she had learned to scan streets, not the casual survey of someone checking for traffic, but the specific methodical reading of someone looking for things that were wrong. She saw him almost immediately. He was across the street from Marta's building, partially obscured by the scaffolding on the neighboring brownstone that had been under renovation for most of the year. A man in dark clothing, mid-30s, with the particular stillness of someone who was waiting rather than existing, the quality of a person who had chosen their position deliberately and was occupying it with professional patience. He had a phone in his hand. He was watching the building entrance. East side of the scaffolding, she said, her voice low. Adriano had already seen him. Yes. Does he have? I can't tell from here. His voice was controlled in a way that communicated the answer might not matter. Stay with the car. Adriano. But he was already moving, and the driver was moving with him in the unhurried, purposeful way that she had come to understand was the operational register of people who had done this before. Not running, not telegraphing urgency, just walking across 86th Street with the directional intent of men who had decided something. Claire stood beside the car for approximately 4 seconds. Then she went the other way. The building intercom sometimes worked and sometimes didn't. She had been to this building enough times that she knew the door code. Marta had given it to her 2 years ago when Claire had needed to pick up a key. She punched it in without slowing down and was through the door and up the first flight of stairs before the door finished closing behind her. 3rd floor. She took the stairs at a pace that wasn't quite running, the kind of fast, deliberate climb that didn't announce itself as panic. First landing, second landing. The carpet on the stairs was the same worn burgundy it had always been, the same faded strip of brass carpet tack on each riser that she had navigated in the dark twice after late dinners that ran long. She knocked on the apartment door. Marta opened it in 12 seconds, which meant she was already up and dressed and moving through her morning, which meant the timeline was exactly what Claire had feared. Marta looked at her. Marta was 40, compact and dark-haired, and possessed of a directness that had been Claire's lifeline during the worst of the marriage years. She took one look at Claire's face and stepped back from the door. "What happened?" she said. Not a question. "You need to not leave this building right now." Claire was inside and had the door closed before she finished the sentence. "I need you to call your first appointment and push it. Do you have someone who can cover?" "Claire, I know, I'll explain everything, but right now I need you to make that call." Marta looked at her for one more second, reading her the way Marta read people, with the clinical directness of someone trained to assess bodies and the intelligence of someone who had known Claire for 15 years. Then she picked up her phone. Claire went to the window that overlooked the street below. Adriano and the driver had reached the man by the scaffolding. She couldn't hear the exchange from 3 floors up through a closed window, but she could read the geometry of it. 3 bodies, specific spatial arrangement, the man against the scaffolding with the other 2 at an angle that eliminated easy movement in any direction. The man's phone was in Adriano's hand now. How that transfer had happened, she hadn't seen. It lasted 4 minutes. Then Adriano stepped back. The man moved away from the scaffolding with the particular gait of someone who had received information about the cost of alternative choices, turned east, and did not look back. Adriano looked up at the building. She wasn't sure if he could see her at the 3rd floor window. The morning light was coming from behind her, and the glass was old and slightly reflective, but she raised her hand anyway. He held up the phone he had taken. Then he started toward the building entrance. Behind her, Marta said, "My 9 o'clock is pushed. My 10 is fine where it is." A pause. "Now explain to me what is happening." Claire turned around. Marta was sitting on the arm of her couch with her arms crossed and her expression carrying the particular combination of worry and controlled impatience of a person who had been frightened on behalf of someone they loved and had processed it into readiness. Claire told her. Not the managed version. Not the version that protected Marta from details she couldn't do anything with. The whole thing. The cafe, the card, the contract, the building, the surveillance, the letter, the entrance hall confrontation, the article that was currently live, the warrant, and the photograph time-stamped 40 minutes ago showing Marta's lit window. She was still talking when Adriano knocked and Marta let him in, and she finished while he stood near the door with the man's phone in his hand and the driver visible in the hallway behind him. When she stopped, the apartment was quiet. Marta looked at Adriano. Adriano held her gaze with the equanimity of a man accustomed to being assessed by people deciding whether to trust him. "You're the organized crime person," Marta said. "Yes," he said. "And you've been protecting her for 2 months." "Yes," Marta looked at Claire. "And you're in love with him." The apartment got very quiet. Claire felt the heat that moved into her face and recognized it as the physical evidence of something she had been refusing to name in those exact words, even to herself, even in the dark of the 4th floor bedroom during the hours of not sleeping. She didn't answer. Which was, she knew, its own answer. Marta looked back at Adriano. "What happens to her if I'm a target?" "You're not a target in any permanent sense," Adriano said. "You were leverage. The leverage has been addressed." He set the confiscated phone on Marta's kitchen counter. "The photographs on this phone have been deleted. The man who took them has been encouraged to find different employment." "Encouraged," Marta repeated, strongly. Marta uncrossed her arms. She picked up the phone and looked at the blank screen. "What does strongly encouraged mean in your world?" It means he'll wake up tomorrow with a complete understanding of why this particular line of work isn't worth it. A pause. He won't be back. Marta set the phone back down. She looked at Claire with the expression she had been giving Claire for 15 years when Claire was in a complicated situation that Marta had opinions about. You moved into his house. I'm working on his building. You moved into his house, Marta said again, and the distinction was its own complete sentence. Claire opened her mouth, closed it. Does he know? Marta asked. Know what? That you're in love with him. The apartment was very quiet again. The morning sounds of 86th Street came through the window. A bus, a delivery truck, someone's dog, the ordinary Thursday morning texture of a city block that had no idea how close something bad had come to it 20 minutes ago. We need to talk about what comes next, Claire said. Damien isn't done. The article is live, the warrant is in motion, and I have 22 hours left on a promise I made to Marcus Calloway. She looked at Adriano. I need a plan, a real one, not just reaction. Adriano had been watching her with an expression she couldn't entirely read. When she said, I need a plan, something in his face settled. A return to operational mode, she thought, the part of him that was most comfortable when there was a problem with edges. Marta needs to not be here for the next 48 hours, he said. Not negotiable. Marta started to object. Adriano looked at her directly. He used you to get to her. As long as you're accessible, he'll use you again. I can arrange somewhere comfortable, and I have patience, Marta said. I can arrange coverage. Marta stared at him. You can arrange physical therapy coverage. I can arrange for your schedule to be managed for 48 hours. Yes. A silence during which Marta recalibrated her understanding of the situation. Fine, she said, with the tone of someone tabling a larger argument for a more appropriate moment. Where? An hour later, Marta was packed and in the car with the driver heading to a specific address in Midtown that Adriano had arranged by phone in the time it took Claire to help Marta choose what to bring. Claire stood on the sidewalk and watched the car until it turned the corner and then stood there for another moment in the October morning air, feeling the particular quality of silence that arrives after something that might have been very bad has resolved into something merely difficult. Adriano stood beside her, not touching, just present, in the way he was consistently present, available, oriented, not requiring anything from her. The plan, she said. Walk, he said. I think better walking. They walked east on 86th in the direction Marta's car had gone, not following it, just moving through the morning because he was right that some thinking required motion. The street was doing its regular business around them. Coffee carts, dry cleaning pickup, a school group moving in a loose cluster with the specific chaotic energy of children on a field trip. Damien has now fired everything he was holding, Adriano said. The investigation, the press piece, the personal pressure on your clients and on Marta, he has discharged his full arsenal. Unless there's something else. There's always potentially something else, but the pattern of escalation suggests he believed this round would be decisive. He expected the warrant to produce immediate paralysis on my end, and the article to collapse your professional standing so completely that you'd have nowhere to go. He paused. He didn't account for you. I don't have anywhere to go, she said. The article is live. Calloway has 21 hours. My other clients are going to read it and make their own calls. Calloway is the anchor. If Calloway holds, the others follow. And if he doesn't, then we work with what remains. She thought about the building on 67th Street, the marble floors and the mahogany staircase and the ghost of silk wall coverings and the servants' stairs with the extraordinary newel posts. She thought about the months of work already done, the months ahead. She thought about whether any of that survived the next 24 hours. She thought about what she was actually willing to lose and what she wasn't. I need to talk to Marcus myself, she said. In person, today. That's the right call. I need to tell him the truth, not a managed version. The actual truth about who you are and what the building is and why I'm there. Adriano stopped walking. She stopped with him. They were on a corner with a flower stand at the curb, the vendor arranging buckets of dahlias and late-season sunflowers, with the routine efficiency of someone doing this for the 10,000th time. That may cost you the contract, he said. I know. If Calloway terminates, the others, I know what it may cost. She held his gaze. But the alternative is building the next 3 years of my professional life on a version of events that isn't true. And I'm not doing that. I spent 3 years building a marriage on versions of things that weren't true. I'm not doing that again. She paused. I'll tell him the truth about what the project is and why I took it. What he does with that is his decision. Adriano was looking at her with the complete unhurried attention that she had stopped finding unnerving some time in the past 6 weeks. The attention that had started to feel like the opposite of what she had expected it to feel like. All right, he said. And I need you to let me do it without running parallel management on the outcome, she said. Whatever I say to Marcus, whatever he decides, let that be what it is. All right? I mean it. Claire. His voice had a quality she didn't hear in it often. Something underneath the control. Something that had decided to be direct. I know you mean it. I also know I've made it complicated for you to know what I mean when I say something, so I want to be clear. He held her gaze. When I agree to something, I keep it. Full stop. She looked at him in the October morning on the corner by the flower stand and thought about 3 years of agreements that weren't kept and promises that were instruments of control and a man who had smiled at charity galas and put his hand through walls in private. She thought about the specific clinical way she had learned to evaluate what was real. She thought about the past 6 weeks and what she had actually observed. I know, she said. It surprised her slightly how much she meant it. They called Marcus Calloway from the car on the way back to the townhouse and arranged a meeting for noon. Adriano disappeared into the library with his attorney on the phone for the 2 hours before she had to leave for Calloway's office. And Claire went upstairs and stood in the 4th-floor bathroom and looked at herself in the mirror with the unsparing honesty of someone who needed to know exactly who they were walking into a room as. She looked tired. She looked like someone who had been running on adrenaline and purpose and inadequate sleep for 2 months. She also looked, she thought, like someone who had stopped apologizing for taking up space, which was a look she had not seen on her own face in a long time. She changed into the clothes she wore when she wanted to be taken seriously. Dark trousers, a well-cut jacket she had bought before the marriage with money she had earned, the professional armor of a woman who had learned that presentation wasn't vanity, it was communication. She fixed her hair. She picked up her portfolio. She went downstairs. Adriano was in the library doorway. He looked at her. A single, complete look. The kind that took inventory without performing it. You don't need anything else, he said. She walked to Calloway's office on her own. She told the car to drop her 2 blocks away because she wanted the 2 blocks, wanted the physical act of walking into the meeting under her own power. She went through the lobby of the building, took the elevator to the 14th floor, gave her name to the receptionist, and sat in the waiting area for 3 minutes looking at the architecture of the space and thinking about original design intention versus contemporary intervention, which was the thought process that calmed her more reliably than any other. Marcus Calloway came out himself to collect her, which was a choice that meant something. He showed her into his office, real office, not a conference room, bookshelves and a desk with actual work on it, windows overlooking Midtown with the particular compressed energy of Manhattan at noon. He sat. She sat. Tell me, he said. She told him. 31 minutes. The cafe, the contract, the building, and the genuine architectural significance of the project, the living arrangement and why, the divorce situation and what Damien had done with the press piece and the federal records, the criminal enterprise stated directly, the distinction between the work she had done, which was architecturally legitimate and documented and represented her professional practice honestly, and the business context of the client who had commissioned it. She told him about the servant's staircase with the cast-iron newel posts and the silk wall coverings going ghost pale in the upstairs sitting room. She told him that the building was one of the most significant unreported surviving examples of 19th century residential architecture in Manhattan, and that the restoration was going to be the best work of her career. She told him the truth about all of it and let it be what it was. When she finished, Marcus Calloway was quiet for a moment. He was looking at his desk, not at her, with the particular inward expression of someone running a genuine calculation rather than a defensive one. The federal investigation, he said. Is it going to result in charges? I don't know, she said. That's an honest answer. If it does, if he's charged, the building goes into legal limbo potentially. Yes, potentially. The project could be suspended pending resolution. She paused. That's a real risk. But the work you've done so far is documented. The plans exist regardless of what happens to the building ownership. Yes. Another silence. The article describes you as compromised, as having your judgment affected by a personal relationship. My judgment, she said, is documented in every structural decision I've made in that building for the past 6 weeks. I can produce those documents. You can have your own structural engineer review every decision I've made for any evidence of anything other than best professional practice. She held his gaze. What you'll find is that I've been doing excellent work under complicated circumstances. The circumstances don't contaminate the work. Marcus Calloway looked at her for a long moment. My board is going to ask about this, he said. I know. Some of them are going to push to suspend the contract pending clarity on the Moretti situation. I know. What do you want me to tell them? She thought about it. Tell them that you hired me for the quality of my work and that the quality of my work hasn't changed. Tell them that you met with me directly and asked hard questions and got direct answers. Tell them whatever you actually believe after this meeting. She paused. I'm not asking you to protect me, Marcus. I'm asking you to make an informed decision. He was quiet for another moment. Then he put both hands flat on his desk, which was a physical gesture she had seen him make before when he had decided something. I'm going to need a week, he said. Before I make any formal announcement to the board, I need a week. The investigation will clarify or it won't. The dust will settle or it won't. He looked at her directly. But I'm not terminating. Not today. Not based on an anonymous press piece and a federal warrant that hasn't produced charges. She held his gaze. Thank you. Don't thank me. Bring me the best restoration project this city has seen in 20 years. She was back in the car at 1:43, and she sat in the back seat for a moment before telling the driver to move, and she let herself feel what she felt. The shaky relief of it, the bone-tired weight of the morning, and underneath both of those things a clarity that had been building for a long time and had arrived now, fully. She called Adriano. Calloway is holding, she said. A pause. Good. He needs a week. The investigation needs to clarify. I'm working on it. I know. She paused. I need to talk to you when I get back. Another pause, different in quality from the first. I'll be here. She watched Manhattan move past the car windows on the way back to 67th Street, the city doing its relentless Thursday afternoon thing, pedestrians and deliveries and yellow cabs, and the permanent scaffolding of a place in constant reconstruction. She thought about what she needed to say when she got back. She had been thinking around it for weeks, circling it the way you circle a structural problem you haven't fully diagnosed yet, taking measurements from different angles. She knew now what the diagnosis was. She had known, if she was honest, for longer than she had admitted. The car stopped outside the townhouse. She got out. She stood on the sidewalk and looked up at the limestone facade with its damaged cornices and its arched windows and its 130 years of surviving things. And she thought about the first time she had stood here and seen the bones underneath the damage and known immediately that it was worth everything it was going to cost. She went inside. He was waiting in the entrance hall, not pacing, not performing expectation, just present, in the way he was always present, with the quality of a person who had decided where they were going to be and was being there completely. She stopped 2 feet from him. The entrance hall was quiet. Outside, the city continued. Above them, the chandeliers hung in their plastic sheeting, waiting. I know what you're going to say, he said. Do you? I've known for some time. His voice was very quiet. I've been waiting for you to be ready. She looked at him, the lines around his eyes, the scar at his temple, the controlled face that she had learned to read over 6 weeks of proximity and candlelit dinners and 3 a.m. Italian phone calls and a man standing in her entrance hall with the stillness of something that had decided she was worth protecting and had not changed its mind once since making that decision. Adriano, she said. Yes. The front door opened. Not Damien. Her mind went there for one cold second and then resolved. It was one of Adriano's men, breathing hard with the specific quality of someone who had moved fast to get here, and the expression on his face was the one she had learned meant something had happened that had not been anticipated. He's here, the man said. Not explaining who, not needing to. Not alone. Building service entrance, back of the block. 3 men. One of them... A pause. One of them has something. The entrance hall went cold. Adriano's face closed in the way it had closed during the federal agent's visit, the full shutdown, and in the movement that followed, him turning, his hand going to the inside of his jacket, where she had not until this moment understood there was something besides a phone. She saw the full reality of what his life actually was beneath the dinners, and the restored silk wall coverings, and the complete attentive silence when she talked about architectural intention. This was what it meant. This was the other version, the permanent presence beneath the tailored surface. She thought about leaving. Her feet did not move. Adriano turned back to her. His expression was unreadable in the way that meant everything was present and none of it was available for her to see. "Go upstairs," he said. "No." "Claire." "I said no." Her voice was very steady. Her heart was doing its too-fast thing, the adrenaline arithmetic of a situation that the body understood was serious, but her voice was completely steady. "Tell me what's happening." He looked at her for 1 second. One complete, total second that contained everything. "Damien came to end it," he said, "and he brought someone who knows how." The entrance hall held its breath, and Claire understood that the conversation she had come inside to have, the one she had been circling for weeks, the diagnosis she had finally arrived at, was going to have to wait, because the man she had almost said it to was standing in front of her with his hand inside his jacket and 3 men at the service entrance. And everything they had been building toward was about to be decided not by words, but by what happened in the next few minutes. She thought about bones under damage, about things that survived. "Then let's end it," she said. "Well," the service entrance was at the back of the building, accessible through a narrow alley off 67th Street that ran between the townhouse and the neighboring property. A gap barely wide enough for 2 people to pass, the kind of urban seam that existed in older blocks, where the original construction had left functional but overlooked passages between estates. Claire had mapped it 6 weeks ago. She had mapped every entry and exit point in the building on her first full assessment walk, the way she always mapped buildings. Not for security reasons then, just professional habit, the architectural reflex of understanding how a structure breathed and moved and connected to the world outside it. She knew the service entrance opened into a utility corridor that ran behind the kitchen level and connected to the basement stairs. She knew the basement had 2 points of access to the main building. She knew the ceiling height in the corridor was 7 feet, and the floor was original stone, and the single light fixture had a burned bulb that had been on Elena's maintenance list for 2 weeks. Adriano's man, she had learned his name was Reyes over the past weeks without ever quite asking for it, was relaying details in rapid low Italian that she caught in fragments. 3 men, service alley, one carrying something he described with a word she didn't know. The word made Adriano's jaw set in a way she had not seen before. "What's the word?" she asked Adriano. He looked at her, a decision happening fast behind his eyes. "A weapon," he said, "not a firearm." She processed that. Damien hired someone who works with bladed instruments? Damien hired someone who wants this to look like something that happened to a building rather than something that happened to people. A pause. Accelerant. The cold that moved through her was different from every previous cold in the past 2 months. More physical, more specific, seated in the body's oldest knowledge about what fire meant. "He's going to burn it," she said. "He's going to try to make it appear accidental. A building under renovation, construction materials, old wiring." Adriano's voice was completely flat. "And anything in it." She thought about the silk wall coverings going ghost pale in the upstairs sitting room, the Carrara marble in the master bath, the cast iron newel posts. 130 years of surviving things. She thought about Elena, who lived in the staff quarters on the 2nd floor. "Elena," she said immediately. "Reyes." Adriano's voice was sharp. Reyes was already moving toward the staff staircase, phone to his ear. Claire looked at the library door. All her work was in there. 6 weeks of drawings, assessments, material specifications, contractor correspondence, the full preliminary documentation for a restoration that represented 15 years of professional trajectory arriving at its most significant project. She thought about it for exactly 2 seconds and then stopped thinking about it, because paper and drawings and specifications could be rebuilt and people could not. "What do you need from me?" she asked. Adriano was already at the vestibule door, moving with the compressed efficiency of someone executing a plan that had been forming faster than the conversation. Stay in the entrance hall. The door has a bolt that takes a key from the outside. I'm engaging it. You're locking me in. I'm locking them out. He turned to look at her. One full turn, both hands briefly free of his jacket, his face open in a way she had only glimpsed in pieces before. The police are already called. They'll be here in 4 minutes. I need you to be standing in this entrance hall when they arrive. And you? I'll be at the service entrance. She understood what that meant. She had understood for 2 months what the other version of him required when it was activated, and she was not naive, and she was not going to perform shock about it now. Don't get hurt, she said. Something moved across his face, not the ghost smile and not the controlled flatness. Something else, something she had not seen before, too fast to fully read. Stay in the entrance hall, he said. He went through the vestibule door. She heard the bolt engage from the outside, the heavy mechanism of a century-old lock that had been designed to hold against things that might want in. She stood in the entrance hall. She was not good at standing still. She had never been good at it. She was a person who thought through movement, who processed through action, who had spent 3 years of a bad marriage using work as the mechanism for managing everything that couldn't be otherwise managed. Standing in the entrance hall with her heart running too fast and the building silent around her and 4 minutes as an abstract unit of time that her body was refusing to experience as abstract. This was harder than anything she had been asked to do in the past 2 months. She heard them at the back of the building at 90 seconds. Not voices, sounds. The specific sound of people moving through a space with the focused quiet of people who believe they are undetected, which is a different sound from actual silence. The stone floor of the utility corridor transmitted it differently than the plaster and wood of the upper floors. Then a voice. Low, male, language she didn't recognize. Then silence. Then a sound she did recognize, which was the sound of a physical confrontation. Not cinematic, not clean, but the actual acoustics of bodies in a confined space making contact with each other and with the stone walls and floor. Brief. Violent in the specific, compressed way of things that happen in narrow corridors with no room to maneuver. Then nothing. She was standing at the vestibule door with her hand on the bolt. She couldn't open from this side when she heard footsteps on the service stairs, the basement stairs, ascending, the particular rhythm of one person moving at a deliberate pace. The footsteps crossed the kitchen level, continued up to the entrance level. The internal door from the kitchen corridor opened. Adriano walked into the entrance hall. He had a cut along his left cheekbone, shallow but bleeding steadily in the way face cuts did, and his jacket was gone. And there was a darkening on his right side along the ribs that would be significant bruising by morning. He was breathing harder than she had ever seen him breathe, the controlled respiration fully abandoned, his chest moving with the visible effort of someone whose body had been working at its limit for the past 4 minutes. He looked at her standing at the vestibule door with her hand on the bolt that wouldn't open, and something crossed his face. Not relief exactly, something more complicated than relief. Something that had been held in reserve for a long time and was now very close to the surface. "Are you hurt?" she asked. Her voice came out completely steady, which was not what her interior felt like. "No." A pause. "Yes. Ribs, not broken." He moved toward her at the same careful pace, favoring his right side. "The 3 men. Reyes has 2. The third, the one with the accelerant, ran. He stopped 6 feet from her. He'll be found. He won't be a problem after that." She looked at the cut on his cheekbone. She looked at the careful way he was holding his right side. She looked at his face, the lines and the scar, and the controlled surface that was not, right now, fully controlled. She crossed the 6 feet between them. She put her hand against his face, carefully, not touching the cut. Just her palm against the line of his jaw, and she felt him go very still the way he had gone still in the cafe when he had made a decision and was committed to it. "Claire," he said. "Don't," she said. "Don't manage it." He closed his eyes for approximately 2 seconds. She felt his jaw move under her hand. When he opened them again, the surface was not reconstructed the way it usually reconstructed. It was something she had not seen in his face before. Not fully. Not like this. It was the face of someone who had stopped carrying something very heavy and was in the first moment of not carrying it. I need to tell you something, she said. I know what you need to tell me. Let me say it anyway. He held her gaze. The entrance hall was very quiet. The chandeliers above them hung in their plastic sheeting. The marble floors held their cracked geometric pattern. The mahogany staircase waited in its partial restoration, the whole extraordinary, ruined, magnificent building holding its breath around them. I love you, she said. She had not said those words to anyone in 4 years. The last time she had said them, they had been hope performing as certainty, faith mistaken for evidence, the things she had wanted to be true that she had said aloud often enough to believe. She had learned, in the years since, the difference between the two kinds of saying. This was not hope performing, this was observation arriving at its conclusion. Adriano looked at her. His hand came up and covered hers where it was still against his jaw, and she felt the warmth of it, the weight of it, the slight roughness of his palm from whatever the past 4 minutes had required of his hands. I know, he said quietly. I've known for some time. A pause. I've been in love with you since the day you spent 40 minutes on the servants' staircase and forgot entirely why you were in the building. She felt the sound that came out of her. Not quite a laugh, not quite anything categorizable. Something that was the release of 2 months of managed emotion, finding the first available exit. He pulled her in carefully, mindful of his ribs, and she let herself be pulled, and she stood in the entrance hall of a crumbling, magnificent building with her face against the shoulder of the most dangerous man she had ever known, and thought about bones under damage and things that survived. Outside, the first siren was audible, then a second. The police were 40 seconds out. They stepped apart, both of them, at the same moment, not away from each other, just to the appropriate distance for what was about to happen next. This is going to be complicated, she said. Yes. The police, the investigation, the warrant, Damien. Yes. We should talk about all of it. We will. He touched the back of her hand briefly with 2 fingers. We have time. The police were 4 officers and a sergeant, and then 2 more officers, and then a detective who arrived 8 minutes after the first responders with the focused energy of someone who had been waiting for a call like this and had a context for it already. Adriano's attorney arrived 17 minutes after that, which Claire suspected was not a coincidence of timing. She stood in the entrance hall and answered questions with the direct accuracy she had always brought to difficult conversations, and she watched Adriano do the same from across the room, measured, precise, giving exactly the information required and framing it with the practiced exactness of someone who had been doing this for 12 years. She watched the detective watch him with the particular expression of a man who respected the game, even when he was on the opposite side of it. Reyes was in the basement with 2 men who were going to have legal problems for a very long time. The third man was found 40 minutes later 3 blocks east, the accelerant equipment still in his possession, which was a piece of evidentiary good fortune that Claire recognized as not entirely accidental. The detective asked her at one point about her relationship to the building and to Mr. Moretti, and she answered both questions with the same direct honesty she had brought to Marcus Calloway's office that afternoon. The detective wrote it down and looked at her with an expression she couldn't fully categorize and moved on to the next question. Damien Vale was taken into custody at his apartment on Park Avenue at 11:14 that night. She found out from Rachel Brenner, who called with the information and the specific quality of controlled excitement that trained legal professionals produced when something had gone significantly in their client's favor. Conspiracy to commit arson. Conspiracy to commit assault. The third man, whose legal situation was now very complicated, had been cooperative in the way that people become cooperative when cooperation is the only remaining path to a reduced sentence. The divorce proceedings, Rachel said, are going to look very different now. Claire sat on the edge of the 4th floor bed and looked at the restored ceiling plaster. She had completed the repair work on that section 2 weeks ago, the original design fully recovered, the damage addressed and resolved, and felt the slow metabolizing of 2 months of sustained crisis beginning to move through her system. Handle it, she told Rachel. Handle all of it. I trust your judgment. She sat with the phone in her lap for a long time after that. Elena knocked at 10 past midnight and brought tea without being asked, set it on the bedside table with her usual efficient grace, and paused at the door. The cut on his face, Elena said. He won't let me near it. Claire looked up. Elena's expression was the expression of a woman who had been managing this household and this man for a significant number of years and had developed opinions about both. He's in the library, she added, and left. Claire went downstairs. He was at the desk with his jacket still gone and his shirt sleeves rolled and the cut on his cheekbone dried now but still needing attention. There were documents in front of him. She recognized the format of legal correspondence, and his phone was face down on the desk, which meant he had finished the calls he needed to make and had not yet decided what came next. She found the first aid kit in the kitchen with the efficient navigation of someone who had spent 6 weeks learning where everything in a building lived. She brought it back to the library and sat in the chair across from him and opened it without asking. "You don't need to," he started. "I know I don't need to." She found the antiseptic wipe and the appropriate closure strips. "Hold still." He held still. She cleaned the cut with the careful precision she brought to everything that required it, and she felt him watching her face while she worked with the attention that had never stopped being complete and unhurried, even when everything around them was neither of those things. "The warrant," she said, focusing on the cut. "What does your attorney think?" "That it's manageable. The records they've requested are clean. The investigation was targeted at a specific period, and the documentation from that period is solid." A pause. "There will be an uncomfortable few months. Some operations will need to restructure. Several relationships will need renegotiation." Another pause. "It will require significant changes. To your business. To my life." He was quiet while she applied the closure strips. "I've been thinking about changes for some time. Before all of this, the building was part of that." She smoothed the last strip into place and sat back slightly. "The building was part of what?" He looked at her. "I'm 39 years old," he said. "I have run something that I inherited at 31 because I was the only one available to run it, and because I didn't know how to do anything else. I have spent 8 years being competent at a thing I did not choose and managing the cost of that competence." He paused. "When my grandfather left me this building, he left a letter with it. He said the building was the only thing the family had ever made that wasn't bought with money that cost someone else something." A long pause. "I think he wanted someone to restore it. I think he wanted someone to make something instead of just maintaining an empire." She sat with that. The library was very quiet around them, the building settling into its late-night sounds, the ordinary nocturnal respiration of old stone and old wood. "You can't walk away from it," she said, not as an objection, just as the truth she understood. "No, not immediately, not completely. It doesn't work that way." He held her gaze. "But it can be reduced, restructured. Some of it is already legitimate. More of it can become so." A pause. "It's a longer timeline than I'd choose, but it's a real one." She thought about what that meant. She thought about it with the same directness she had brought to the Callaway meeting and the conversation in the entrance hall and every other moment in the past 2 months, when the easiest thing would have been to soften the reality into something more comfortable. She thought about who he was and what that meant, and what she was choosing if she stayed, and whether the choosing was clear-eyed. She thought about 3 years of a marriage to a man who had hidden his nature until it was too late to make a different choice. She thought about a man who had told her, from the first conversation in the library, exactly what he was. "The servant's staircase," she said. He blinked, the slight confusion of a man whose train of thought had been redirected. "What about it?" "I want to restore the landing on the 4th floor next. The ironwork there is the best in the building, and it's been covered under boarding since the 90s. I want to get to it before the contractor finishes the south wing." She paused. "I need to know you're committed to the full scope, the whole building, not the parts that are easiest." He looked at her for a moment, understanding the conversation they were having that was not only about the staircase. "The whole building," he said. "I've said so from the beginning." "You have," she agreed. She put the first aid kit back together. She was aware of him watching her with that complete attention, the attention she had stopped finding unnerving and started, somewhere along the way, finding necessary. The specific comfort of being seen fully by someone who had looked and not looked away. "The things I said in the entrance hall," she said without looking up from the kit. "I meant them. I know you meant them. I need to know if—" "Claire." His voice was very quiet. "I told you I've been in love with you since the servant's staircase. That was 6 weeks ago, and nothing that has happened since has changed it. The warrant hasn't changed it. The federal investigation hasn't changed it. Damian Vale hasn't changed it." A pause. You're not a situation I'm managing. You're not a person I'm protecting because it's convenient or because it serves some other purpose. You're—" He stopped. Something moved in his face that was neither the controlled surface nor the rare glimpse beneath it, but something she had not seen before. Something that was simply him, without any of the architecture of management. "You're the person I want to make something with, instead of just maintaining things." She looked at him. The library was quiet. The building breathed around them. "Okay," she said. He reached across the desk and took her hand. Not dramatically, just took it, her hand in his, and held it with the particular quality of someone who has decided on a thing and is not going to be argued out of it. They sat like that for a while in the quiet of the library, surrounded by the work of what they were building. The months that followed were not simple. Nothing about the situation resolved cleanly or quickly because real things did not resolve cleanly or quickly, and Claire had spent enough years learning the difference between the clean versions of stories and the actual ones to have stopped expecting it. The federal investigation continued for 4 months, moved through its process with the grinding institutional pace of such things, and arrived at a conclusion that required Adriano's attorneys' full skills and 2 significant restructurings of affiliated business entities, but did not produce charges. His attorney called it a managed outcome. Adriano called it expensive. Claire called it the beginning of the longer timeline he had described. Damien Vale's arrest produced consequences that moved faster. The conspiracy charges, supported by the cooperative third man, and the corroborating electronic evidence that investigators developed over 6 weeks, resolved in a plea that involved Damien accepting the original divorce settlement terms, plus forfeiture of all 3 jointly owned properties as part of a broader financial penalties arrangement. He received a sentence that, given his attorneys and his resources and the specifics of what he had pled to, was not as long as it might have been. Claire sat with her own feelings about that for several weeks and arrived, eventually, at the conclusion that the specific length of his sentence was less important to her than the permanent legal record that now documented what he had done. She divorced him on a Tuesday in February, in a courthouse in Lower Manhattan, in a proceeding that lasted 14 minutes, and produced a document she held in both hands on the courthouse steps in the February cold and did not cry over. She had done her crying privately in the months prior, at appropriate moments, not for Damien, not for the marriage, but for the version of herself who had believed things that weren't true for long enough that the believing had cost her significant pieces of herself. She had mourned that properly and completely, and had arrived at the other side of it lighter than she had expected. Marta was on the courthouse steps with her. They stood in the February cold, and Marta held the document while Claire put her gloves on, and then handed it back without comment. And they walked to the nearest coffee place and ordered the largest size available, and sat by the window watching the street. "Are you all right?" Marta asked. "Yes," Claire said, and meant it. "Are you going back to the building?" "I live in the building." Marta gave her the look she had been giving her since October. "You know what I mean." Claire looked out at the February street. "I know what you mean, and yes, I'm going back to the building." Marta drank her coffee. "He's good to you." "He is." "He's also a man who—" "I know what he is," Claire said. "I've always known. It's not a surprise I'm managing. It's a fact I've looked at directly and made a decision about." She paused. "Which is different from what I did before." Marta was quiet for a moment. "You sound different." "I am different. Good different." "I think so." She looked at her coffee. "Harder to surprise, less likely to confuse hope for evidence, less patient with things that aren't what they claim to be." She paused. "Better at knowing what I want and saying so." The Marcus Calloway project had not died. It had come close in late October when 2 board members pushed hard for contract suspension, but Calloway had held, as he had told her he would, and by December the federal situation had clarified sufficiently that the board's concerns had been addressed. She delivered the first completed section of the project in January, the East Wing reception rooms, fully restored to their original specification with a series of material and technique decisions that Marcus had walked through in silence and then stood for a long moment looking at before saying, quietly, that it was the finest interior restoration work he had seen in 15 years. She had called Adriano from the street outside Calloway's building to tell him. He had been quiet for a moment, and she had heard in his silence the same thing she had come to hear in all his silences. The presence of something he was feeling fully and expressing through the specific quality of his not speaking. "Good," he had said. "I knew it would be." "You hadn't seen it yet." "I've seen everything else you've done. I didn't need to see this one." She had stood on the street in the January cold and felt something in her chest that had been tight since the cafe in September release another increment. Not all the way. She was honest enough to know that the full release of 3 years of damage was not a single moment's work, but a longer project, the kind that required consistent attention and revisiting and the willingness to check structural integrity regularly rather than assuming it held because you wanted it to. But an increment, real and measurable. The townhouse was transformed by spring, not finished. She had told him from the beginning that real restoration couldn't be rushed, that the kind of work she was doing required the building to be understood rather than just repaired. And he had agreed and continued to agree in practice rather than just in principle, which distinguished him from every other client she had ever worked with. But transformed in the way that buildings transform when the intention behind the work is genuine, room by room, the original design coming back into visibility, the accumulated damage addressed without pretending it had never happened, the building becoming itself again rather than becoming what someone else had decided it should be. The entrance hall marble was repaired and polished, the cracked sections stabilized rather than replaced, the repair lines visible and honest the way honest restoration required. The chandeliers were cleaned, rewired, rehung, and when they were first illuminated at full brightness, Elena stood in the entrance hall and looked up at them with an expression that Claire had only seen on her face twice before. The controlled emotion of a person who had lived alongside a loss for so long that its reversal felt almost too large to contain. The servants' staircase was the project Claire had spent the most time on. The ironwork was exceptional. She had been right about that from the first walkthrough, and the full restoration, which required a specialist she had located in Philadelphia and brought to Manhattan for 3 weeks, had revealed details in the casting that she had not been able to see through the accumulated surface treatment. She had photographed every inch of it when it was finished and sent the photographs to 2 colleagues whose work she respected, both of whom had responded with the specific reverence that people in her field reserved for things that were genuinely significant. Adriano had found her on the staircase landing on the evening it was finished. She was sitting on the top step of the restored section, looking at the ironwork in the early evening light coming through the window at the landing, doing the things she had been doing since the first walkthrough, looking at it and understanding it. He sat on the step beside her. They sat there for a while without talking, the building quiet around them in the specific late afternoon way of buildings whose day's work is done. The ironwork caught the light. The restored plasterwork on the staircase walls held the shadows cleanly. "Do you remember what you said," she said, "about your grandfather's letter?" "Yes." "That he wanted someone to make something, instead of maintaining things." "Yes." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "I think he'd like what we're making." He was quiet for a moment. Then he put his hand over hers where it rested on the stair beside him, and she felt the warmth of it, the particular weight of it, the same 2-finger gesture from the library on the night everything was over and everything was beginning that had become, over months, one of the things she knew about him, the way you know things about people you have decided to know fully. "I think so too," he said. They were married in October, 1 year almost exactly after the morning in the cafe. On the rooftop terrace, restored over the summer, the ironwork railing repaired, the original layout recovered, the views of Manhattan in every direction exactly what someone in 1887 had stood here and envisioned, with 20 people who mattered to them, and the city spread out below like a proof of something. The ceremony was brief and direct, which was how both of them preferred things. Claire wore a dress she had chosen herself without consultation, dark and clean-lined, and she stood on the rooftop in the October sun and said the words she meant with the same directness she brought to everything that mattered. And she watched Adriano say his with the particular quality of a man who did not make promises easily, and therefore meant the ones he made absolutely. Marta cried, which she did not acknowledge when Claire looked at her. Elena did not cry, which meant nothing, because Elena never cried. Afterward, they stood at the rooftop railing with the city below them and glasses in their hands, and Adriano looked at the skyline with an expression she had come to know as the one he wore when he was processing something he did not have words for yet. "What are you thinking?" she asked. I'm thinking about the building, he said. Which part? All of it. What it was when you came. What it is now. He looked at her. What you did to it. What we did, she said. It takes two. He looked at her for a moment with the complete attention that had never changed from the first day in the cafe and had stopped being unnerving and started being the thing she looked for in the morning when she came downstairs, and the thing she understood, without drama, was one of the essential conditions of her life now. Yes, he said, what we did. Below them, Manhattan moved through its evening, indifferent and relentless and full of the ongoing human business of building and losing and building again, of people in cafes and strangers in corner booths, and the particular algebra of moments that look like accidents until you understand what they were. She had come to sign divorce papers and had left with a business card and a different life. She had come to his building to restore architecture and had restored something else at the same time, the way restoration work always went. You came for the visible damage, and you found the bones. And if the bones were sound, the rest was just work. Difficult, necessary, honest work that required you to understand what you were dealing with before you could decide what it could become. The bones had been sound. The rest had been work. And standing on the rooftop of a building that had come back to itself after decades of careful neglect, in a city that kept moving through the dark below them, Claire Whitaker, Claire Moretti, felt the thing that she had stopped trusting she would ever feel again. The thing that was not hope mistaking itself for evidence, but evidence arrived at through full attention and clear eyes and the willingness to look at difficult things directly. She felt unafraid, not because the world had become safe. She understood too clearly now that the world did not become safe, that safety was not a permanent condition, but a daily construction, that the person beside her carried a world she would spend years understanding, and that the understanding would sometimes be hard and would always be honest. But unafraid the way that people who have survived something are sometimes unafraid afterward, not because they have forgotten the cost, but because they have paid it fully and know now what they are capable of paying, and they have looked at what remains after the pain and found it worth the price. She put her hand on the restored ironwork railing, the cold October iron solid under her palm, and looked out at the city that had been running its own business all along, completely indifferent to every choice she had made in the past year, and felt for the first time in longer than she could clearly name, completely and simply grateful. "Let's go inside," she said. "It's cold." "In a minute," he said, the same way he always said it when he wasn't done with a view. She left her hand on the railing. She waited the minute. The city moved below them. The building held them. The night came down over Manhattan the way it always did. Completely, without apology, indifferent to everything that had happened in its hours and everything that would happen in the ones ahead. And neither of them looked away.